The mind fears change because change feels like a small death. It asks you to release the person you have been, the pain you have known, the story you have repeated, and the safety you created around what is familiar. But if staying the same truly protected you, why does it still feel so heavy? Why does the same old life keep stealing your peace? Why do you keep asking for freedom while holding tightly to the very thing that keeps you trapped? The truth is, change is not always the enemy. Sometimes change is the door your suffering has been trying to open for you. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the mind does not fear change because change will destroy you. It fears change because change will expose what was never truly yours to begin with. Tonight, as you listen to these teachings, something quiet will begin inside you. The fear that once felt powerful will start to lose its voice. The old attachments that once felt like home will begin to feel like chains. You will see that impermanence is not punishment, but truth. Letting go is not loss, but release. And the freedom you have been praying for may be hiding behind the very change you keep resisting. When you wake tomorrow, you may not become a different person all at once, but you may finally stop fighting the part of life that is trying to set you free. This is not just another lesson about change. This is a gentle return to the truth that nothing fixed can imprison a mind that is ready to awaken. Are you ready? Let's begin. And this is where the first truth begins. The mind does not only fear change because change is unknown. It fears change because change asks it to loosen its grip on what it has mistaken for safety. There is a strange pain in wanting freedom while still holding the cage. You may say you want peace, but part of you still reaches for the same thoughts that disturb you. You may say you want healing, but part of you still returns to the same memory, the same person, the same version of yourself that keeps the wound alive. You may say you are tired of suffering, but when life offers you a way out, something inside whispers, "What if I lose who I am without this?" That is the quiet power of attachment. It does not always feel like desire. Sometimes attachment feels like loyalty. Sometimes it feels like love. Sometimes it feels like responsibility. Sometimes it feels like fear wearing the clothes of wisdom. You tell yourself you are being careful, patient, faithful, realistic, or strong. But beneath all those names, the mind may simply be afraid to release what has become familiar. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment is one of the deepest roots of suffering. Not because caring is wrong, not because love is wrong, not because having dreams is wrong, but because the mind begins to suffer when it tries to possess what was never meant to be possessed. It clings to people, outcomes, memories, identities, comfort, pain, control, and even old sadness. Then, when life begins to move, the mind panics. It says, "Do not change, do not leave, do not end, do not become different." But life has never obeyed that command. Everything moves, everything shifts, everything breathes in and breathes out. The body changes, relationships change, feelings change, seasons change. Even the thoughts you believed yesterday may not fit the person you are becoming today. The mind sees this movement and becomes afraid because attachment wants life to stay still. Attachment wants the river to stop flowing so it can feel secure. But a river that stops flowing does not become peaceful. It becomes trapped. This is why freedom can feel frightening. Freedom means space. Freedom means possibility. Freedom means no longer being controlled by what once defined you. But to the attached mind, space can feel like emptiness. Possibility can feel like danger. A new life can feel like betrayal of the old one. So even when the door opens, the mind may stay seated inside the room, not because the room is peaceful, but because the room is known. Many people do not stay stuck because they love their suffering. They stay stuck because their suffering has become familiar. The familiar pain has a shape, it has a voice, it has a routine. You know how to carry it. You know when it comes. You know what it tells you. You know how to explain yourself through it. But freedom has no such certainty. Freedom asks you to step into a space where the old excuses may no longer work, where the old identity may no longer protect you, where the old story may no longer give you a reason to remain small. And this is where the mind begins to resist. It says, "I want peace," but then it keeps replaying the argument. It says, "I want to move on," but then it keeps checking the past for signs. It says, "I want to be happy," but then it keeps choosing the thoughts that prove life is unfair. It says, "I want change," but only if change does not ask for surrender. But true change always asks for surrender. Not surrender as weakness, but surrender as honesty. The honesty to say, this attachment is no longer protecting me. It is only keeping me near what hurts. Attachment makes the mind fear freedom, because freedom removes the object it has been leaning on. Even when that object is painful, the mind may still depend on it for identity. A person may be attached to someone who no longer treats them with tenderness because the attachment gives them a role. They are the one who waits, the one who hopes, the one who proves their love, the one who endures. Letting go would not only mean losing the person, it would mean losing the role they have built around the person. A person may be attached to anger because anger gives them energy. Without anger, they may have to feel grief. They may have to admit they were hurt. They may have to stop using bitterness as armor. So the mind says, "I cannot let this go." But beneath that sentence is another sentence. "I do not know who I am without this anger." A person may be attached to sadness because sadness keeps them connected to what they lost. They fear that healing means forgetting. They fear that smiling again means the past no longer mattered. So they keep the wound open, not because they enjoy bleeding, but because they believe pain is proof of love. Buddhist wisdom gently questions this. It asks, can love remain without suffering? Can memory remain without chains? Can you honor what was without imprisoning yourself inside it? This is not an easy question. The heart does not open its grip just because the mind hears a wise sentence. Attachment is emotional. It lives in the body. It hides in habits. It returns in quiet moments. It appears when the room is still, when the phone is silent, when the future feels unclear. You may understand that something is over, but still feel pulled toward it. You may know that a path is hurting you, but still feel afraid to walk away. This does not make you weak. It makes you human. The Buddha did not teach detachment as coldness. He taught it as freedom from being ruled by clinging. There is a difference between loving and clinging. Love allows life to breathe. Clinging grabs life by the throat and begs it not to change. Love sees clearly. Clinging sees through fear. Love gives without losing itself. Clinging gives and then secretly demands safety in return. Love can bless what is leaving. Clinging says, if you leave, I disappear. This is why attachment feels so convincing. It does not come to the mind as an enemy. It comes as a promise. It says, hold on and you will be safe. Hold on and you will not be abandoned. Hold on and you will not have to face the unknown. Hold on and maybe the past will become kind. Hold on and maybe the person will change. Hold on and maybe the pain will finally explain itself. But the more tightly you hold, the smaller your life becomes. You stop meeting the present because you are busy guarding what is already passing. You stop hearing new wisdom because your old story is too loud. You stop noticing open doors because your eyes are fixed on the door that closed. You stop trusting life because attachment has trained you to believe that anything uncertain is dangerous. Yet uncertainty is not always danger. Sometimes uncertainty is the space where healing begins. Sometimes not knowing is kinder than repeating what has already harmed you. Sometimes losing control is the first time your spirit can breathe. Sometimes the path you fear is not punishment, but release. The mind does not understand this at first. The mind likes patterns, it likes names, it likes familiar roads. Even if the road leads to suffering, it says, "At least I know this road." That is why old pain can feel safer than new peace. New peace requires trust. Old pain only requires memory. New peace asks you to become present. Old pain lets you remain in the past. New peace asks you to meet yourself without the old costume. Old pain gives you something to hide behind. This is why change can feel threatening, even when it would set you free. Change does not only remove a situation, it reveals the attachments that kept the situation alive inside you. When a relationship ends, the pain is not only about the person leaving, it is also about the dreams attached to them, the future you built in your mind, the version of yourself you were when you loved them, the hope that gave structure to your days. When a job ends, the pain is not only about income or routine. It may be about identity, worth, status, belonging, and the fear of becoming unknown to yourself. When a belief falls apart, the pain is not only about being wrong, it is about losing the mental house you lived in. So the mind says, "No, I cannot let this change." But life has already begun changing. The resistance only makes the change hurt more. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to force yourself into freedom. It asks you to observe the grip. This is very important. Many people turn letting go into another form of violence against themselves. They say, "I should be over this. I should not care. I should not feel this anymore." But that is not awareness. That is rejection. You cannot heal attachment by hating the part of you that clings. You heal it by seeing it clearly. You sit with the fear and ask, "What am I afraid will happen if I let go?" Maybe the answer is, "I will be alone." Maybe it is, "I will have wasted years." Maybe it is, "I will not know what to do next." Maybe it is, "They will forget me." Maybe it is, "I will have to feel the emptiness I have been avoiding." These answers are not enemies. They are doors. They show you where the attachment has tied itself to your sense of survival. The mind often mistakes emotional familiarity for truth. Because something has been present for a long time, it begins to feel real, permanent, and necessary. But Buddhist wisdom reminds us that what is familiar is not always wise. A cage can become familiar. A wound can become familiar. A fear can become familiar. A small life can become familiar. But familiarity does not make something sacred. Sometimes it only means you have repeated it enough times for the mind to stop questioning it. This is why awareness matters. Without awareness, attachment becomes automatic. You reach for the same person, you believe the same thought, you protect the same pain, you choose the same reaction. You call it personality, but it may be conditioning. You call it love, but it may be fear. You call it loyalty, but it may be attachment to suffering. You call it patience, but it may be avoidance of freedom. Awareness pauses the cycle. It does not instantly remove the attachment, but it creates a small space between the feeling and the action. In that space you begin to see. You see the moment your mind wants to run back. You see the story it uses to justify the return. You see how the body tightens when change comes near. You see how fear pretends to be wisdom. You see how the past tries to dress itself as destiny. And once you see clearly, the attachment begins to lose some of its power, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like a knot loosening under warm hands. The mind fears freedom because freedom requires responsibility. As long as you are attached, you can blame the cage. You can say, "I cannot be peaceful because of them. I cannot move forward because of what happened. I cannot change because life has been unfair. And sometimes life has been unfair. Some pain is real. Some wounds were not chosen. Some losses were not deserved. Buddhist wisdom does not deny this. It does not ask you to pretend pain did not happen. But it does ask a deeper question. Must the wound remain your master? Freedom means you no longer build your whole life around what hurt you. That can feel terrifying because it means the next step belongs to you. It means you may have to choose differently. It means you may have to stop waiting for the past to give permission. It means you may have to stop asking the person who hurt you to become the person who heals you. It means you may have to stop using suffering as proof that you cared. This is why the mind may resist freedom. Freedom removes excuses that once felt protective. It asks you to stand in the present with empty hands and an open heart. It asks you to admit that what happened shaped you, but does not have to own you. It asks you to stop feeding old fires just because you have become used to the warmth of burning. Attachment is powerful because it often attaches not only to pleasure, but to pain. Many people understand attachment to pleasant things. They know the mind clings to comfort, praise, success, affection, and security. But fewer people understand that the mind can cling to suffering too. It can cling to rejection because rejection confirms an old belief. It can cling to chaos because peace feels unfamiliar. It can cling to longing because longing gives life direction. It can cling to disappointment because disappointment protects it from hope. This is one of the hidden reasons freedom feels frightening. If you become free, what happens to the old belief that you are unworthy? If you become peaceful, what happens to the identity built around survival? If you become open to life again, what happens to the part of you that promised never to trust? If you release the past, what happens to the story you have used to explain your pain? The mind may not know how to live without that story, so it chooses the known burden over the unknown sky. But Buddhist wisdom teaches that the self is not as fixed as we think. The person you are protecting so fiercely is already changing. The you who first experienced the pain is not exactly the same you listening now. Your body has changed, your thoughts have changed, your understanding has changed, even your grief has changed shape many times. Yet attachment tries to freeze you around one version of yourself. It says, "This is who I am, this is what happened, this is what I must carry." But life keeps whispering, "You are not only this." There is deep mercy in that whisper. You are not only your fear. You are not only your attachment. You are not only the relationship that ended, the mistake you made, the dream that failed, the person who left, the pain that stayed, or the version of you that did not know better. You are a moving stream, not a stone. You are allowed to change because you are already changing. When the mind fears freedom, it often does so because it sees freedom as emptiness. It thinks, "If I let go, there will be nothing left." But emptiness in Buddhist wisdom is not the same as nothingness. It is space. It is openness. It is the truth that things are not fixed in the way the mind imagines. This can feel scary at first because the mind wants solid ground. But what if the solid ground you have been standing on is actually the floor of a prison? What if the emptiness you fear is not a void but a doorway? To release attachment is not to become empty of life. It is to become empty of chains. It is to stop filling your heart with what keeps it heavy. It is to stop calling pressure love, anxiety devotion, obsession loyalty, and fear wisdom. It is to let the hand open and discover that what is true does not need to be strangled to remain. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you care with clearer eyes. You love people without trying to own them. You enjoy moments without demanding they last forever. You pursue dreams without making your worth depend on them. You remember the past without living inside it. You feel grief without becoming grief. You meet change without bowing to panic. That is freedom, not a life where nothing hurts, but a mind that no longer turns every hurt into a home. And still, the path begins gently. You do not have to release everything today. You do not have to become perfectly detached. You only begin by noticing where your hand is closed. Notice what you keep defending, even though it drains you. Notice what you keep returning to, even though it does not bring peace. Notice what you call love, but feels like fear. Notice what you call patience, but feels like self-abandonment. Notice what you call identity, but feels like a prison. This noticing is already a form of awakening. The attached mind says, "I cannot live without this." Awareness asks, "Is that true?" The attached mind says, "If this changes, I will lose myself." Awareness asks, "What self am I afraid to lose?" The attached mind says, "I need certainty before I move." Awareness asks, "Has certainty ever truly existed?" The attached mind says, "This pain is mine." Awareness asks, "Must I keep carrying it to prove it mattered?" These questions do not attack the heart. They open it. They help you see that freedom is not something far away. It begins in the moment you stop believing every fearful thought as if it were truth. It begins when you can feel the pull of attachment and still choose not to obey it immediately. It begins when you can say, "This is familiar, but it is not freedom. This is known, but it is not peace. This is what I have carried, but it is not who I am." There is a quiet courage in letting go. Not the loud courage that needs witnesses, but the hidden courage of a heart that stops negotiating with its own chains. It may look small from the outside. No one may clap. No one may even know. But inside, something sacred happens. The mind, which once feared change, begins to understand that change was not trying to destroy it. Change was trying to return it to movement. The first step into freedom may feel like grief, because attachment always makes release feel like loss. But after the grief, there is space. After the space, there is breath. After the breath, there is clarity. After clarity, there is peace. And slowly, the mind begins to realize that what it feared was not freedom itself. It feared the unfamiliar silence that appears when suffering no longer speaks so loudly. But that silence is not empty. It is alive. It is the place where wisdom can finally be heard. This is why attachment makes the mind fear the freedom it has been asking for, because freedom does not only remove pain, it removes the false safety built around pain. It asks the mind to stop clinging to what is passing, stop worshipping what is familiar, stop confusing control with peace, and stop believing that old suffering is the same as home. And when the mind begins to understand this, even a little, change becomes less like an enemy and more like a teacher. It comes not to take your life away, but to loosen what has been holding your life hostage. It comes to show you that the cage was never locked from the outside. It comes to remind you that the hand can open, the breath can deepen, the story can soften, the heart can begin again. So if something in you is afraid of the freedom you have been asking for, do not hate that fear. Sit with it. Listen to it. Let it reveal the attachment beneath it. Then, with patience, begin to ask whether the thing you are holding is truly holding you back. Because sometimes the mind calls it safety, but the soul knows it is a cage. Sometimes the mind calls it love, but the soul knows it is clinging. Sometimes the mind calls it who you are, but the soul knows it is only who you became while trying to survive. And survival is not the end of the path. Peace is deeper. Freedom is wider. Awakening is possible. The mind fears change because it does not yet trust freedom. But every moment of awareness teaches it. Every small release teaches it. Every honest breath teaches it. Every time you choose not to return to the chain, The mind learns that it can live without the old weight. It learns that what is unfamiliar is not always unsafe. It learns that letting go does not erase you. It reveals you. And perhaps this is the beginning of true liberation, not forcing the mind to stop being afraid, but helping it see that the freedom it fears is the very peace it has been searching for all along. And once the mind begins to see that attachment is not always love, safety, or loyalty, another deeper pattern starts to appear. Beneath many attachments, there is a craving for certainty. The mind does not only cling to people, memories, or old pain. It clings to the feeling of knowing. It wants to know what will happen, who will stay, what will change, what will be lost, what will be gained, and whether the next step will hurt. But life does not offer that kind of guarantee, and this is where quiet suffering begins. There is a kind of prison that has no walls, no locks, and no visible chains. It is built from the sentence, "I need to be sure before I can be at peace." Many people spend years inside this prison without realizing it. They do not call it fear, they call it planning. They call it being careful. They call it protecting their heart. They call it wisdom. But underneath, the mind is begging life for a promise life was never designed to give. The craving for certainty begins quietly. It starts with one question. What if this goes wrong? What if I make the wrong choice? What if I let go and regret it? What if I stay and suffer more? What if they leave? What if I fail? What if I am not ready? At first, these questions seem normal. They seem like the mind trying to help. But soon the questions multiply until they become a cage. The mind no longer asks because it wants clarity. It asks because it is afraid of peace without control. Buddhist wisdom teaches that life is marked by impermanence. Nothing stays fixed. Every condition arises, changes, and passes away. The breath comes and goes. A thought appears and disappears. A feeling rises and fades. A body grows, ages, weakens, and changes. A relationship begins, deepens, shifts, or ends. A season comes with beauty and leaves without asking permission. This is not cruelty. This is the nature of existence. But the mind that craves certainty argues with this truth. It wants the moving world to behave like a solid stone. It wants the future to show its full face before the present is lived. It wants the next chapter to be explained before it turns the page. It wants guarantees from people who are also changing, from situations that are also unstable, and from a life that has never once promised permanence. This craving becomes a prison because the mind starts refusing to live until it feels completely safe. It says, "I will begin when I know it will work." It says, "I will trust when there is no chance of being hurt." It says, "I will let go when I know what will replace this." It says, "I will be happy when nothing can disturb me." But that day never comes. So life keeps moving, and the person keeps waiting. This waiting can look responsible from the outside. Someone may seem thoughtful, patient, mature, and cautious, but inside they may be frozen. Their heart may be standing before an open door, unable to step through because the road outside is not fully visible. They are not choosing peace, they are choosing delay, and delay, when it comes from fear, becomes another form of suffering. The mind believes certainty will bring peace, but often the demand for certainty steals peace before uncertainty ever has a chance to hurt you. A person may lose sleep over a future that has not arrived. They may suffer from conversations that have not happened. They may grieve losses that have not taken place. They may prepare for rejection from people who have not rejected them. They may punish themselves for mistakes they have not made. This is how craving for certainty turns the mind into a place of endless rehearsal. The Buddha pointed us back to the present because the present is the only place where life can truly be met. The past is memory. The future is possibility. Only this breath is here. Only this step is here, only this moment can be touched. But the mind that craves certainty keeps abandoning the present to chase an answer in the future. It leaves the only real ground beneath its feet to run after a shadow. And the strange thing is, even when the mind gets an answer, it often does not become peaceful. It asks for another answer, then another, then another. Certainty becomes like salt water. The more the mind drinks, the thirstier it becomes. You check once, then you check again. You ask once, then you ask again. You receive reassurance, but the relief does not last. Soon the fear returns, wearing a new face. This shows that the real problem was never the absence of information. It was the mind's dependency on control. A person who craves certainty may think, if I can just know what they feel, I will relax. But after they know, they wonder if the feeling will last. Then they wonder if the person will change. Then they wonder if hidden truth exists beneath the words. Then they begin searching tone, timing, silence, and small details. The craving does not end because certainty was never the medicine. Awareness was. Another person may think, if I can just know the right path, I will finally move. But every path contains risk. Every choice closes one door and opens another. Every decision asks for trust. So the person studies, compares, asks, waits, overthinks, and delays. They call it preparation, but deep inside, they are trying to find a path that does not require courage. Such a path does not exist. In Buddhist wisdom, the problem is not that the mind thinks. Thinking is not the enemy. Planning is not the enemy. Reflection is not the enemy. The problem begins when the mind believes it can think its way out of impermanence. It tries to solve life as if life were a puzzle with one permanent answer. But life is more like weather. You can understand patterns, but you cannot command the sky. This is why craving for certainty becomes a quiet prison. It does not always stop you loudly. It does not always look dramatic. It simply keeps you circling. You almost speak your truth, then you wait. You almost begin again, then you pause. You almost leave what drains you, then you ask for one more sign. You almost forgive yourself, then you demand perfect understanding of why everything happened. You almost trust the present, then you run back into the future looking for proof. The prison is quiet because no one may notice it. People may see you going to work, answering messages, smiling when needed, doing ordinary things. But inside, your mind may be pacing back and forth, looking for certainty like a lost key. You may be physically present, yet mentally trapped in 1,000 possible tomorrows. This kind of suffering is exhausting because the mind never rests. It keeps scanning life for danger. It keeps asking, what does this mean? What if it changes? What if I am wrong? What if I cannot handle what comes? It treats uncertainty as if uncertainty itself were an attack. But uncertainty is not attacking you. It is simply the open nature of life. A flower does not know how long it will bloom, yet it blooms. A bird does not receive a written guarantee before it flies, yet it moves with the sky. The breath does not ask if the next breath will arrive before it leaves the body. It simply comes and goes. Nature is not careless. It is intimate with change. It does not demand fixed answers before participating in life. Human suffering deepens because the mind wants to live differently from the rest of existence. Everything else moves, but the mind wants to freeze. Everything else changes, but the mind wants to possess. Everything else arises and passes, but the mind wants permanent assurance. This fight against reality becomes tiring because reality does not fight back. It simply continues. In Buddhism, ignorance does not only mean not knowing facts, it means not seeing things as they are. When the mind craves certainty, it is often refusing to see impermanence clearly. It wants to believe there is a final answer that will remove all fear. It wants to believe the future can be controlled if the mind worries enough. It wants to believe pain can be avoided if every step is predicted. But this is a misunderstanding. Worry does not create safety. It only creates the feeling of doing something while peace disappears. Many people mistake overthinking for protection. They believe that if they think about every possible outcome, they will be ready. But there is a difference between wise preparation and mental imprisonment. Wise preparation looks at what can be done and then returns to the present. Mental imprisonment keeps reopening the same question after there is nothing useful left to add. Wise preparation brings clarity. Craving for certainty brings tightness. Wise preparation helps you move. Craving for certainty keeps you stuck. The body often knows the difference before the mind admits it. Wise preparation may feel steady, grounded, and clear. Fearful certainty-seeking feels tense, restless, and endless. It tightens the chest. It disturbs sleep. It makes silence uncomfortable. It makes ordinary delays feel like signs of disaster. It turns the mind into a courtroom where every moment is evidence. This is especially painful in relationships. The mind wants certainty from another human being, but every human being is a changing river too. Someone can love you today and still be growing. Someone can mean their words and still not know everything they will feel in 10 years. Someone can care for you and still be imperfect. This does not mean trust is foolish. It means trust is not built from guaranteed permanence. Trust is built from presence, honesty, and the courage to meet what is real now. When the mind demands total certainty and love, it may destroy the tenderness it wants to protect. It asks too many questions, not from openness, but from fear. It tests people. It watches for signs. It turns small changes into threats. It cannot enjoy closeness because it is already preparing for loss. In trying to prevent pain, it prevents intimacy. Buddhist wisdom would gently ask, can you love what is here without trying to own tomorrow? This question is not easy because the heart wants assurance, but love becomes heavy when it is forced to carry the mind's demand for permanence. Real love breathes better when it is held with open hands. It becomes kinder when it is not turned into a contract against change. This does not mean accepting disrespect, confusion, or harm. Buddhist wisdom is not asking anyone to remain in uncertainty that damages their dignity. There is a difference between natural uncertainty and repeated instability. Natural uncertainty belongs to life. Repeated instability may belong to an unhealthy situation. Awareness helps you know the difference. Craving for certainty often confuses the two. It may stay in chaos, hoping for one final answer when the pattern itself has already spoken. Sometimes the mind says, I need closure, but what it really means is, I want an answer that makes the pain painless. Closure can be helpful when truth is available, but many times the mind uses closure as another chain. It keeps returning to the same wound, hoping the person who caused confusion will also provide freedom from it. But some answers never come. Some people cannot explain themselves honestly. Some endings remain incomplete. Some stories do not close neatly. If peace depends on a perfect explanation, peace remains under the control of what hurt you. Buddhist wisdom points toward another kind of closure. Not the closure that comes from knowing every detail, but the closure that comes from seeing clearly enough to stop feeding the wound. You may not know why someone acted the way they did. You may not know why a door closed when it did. You may not know why life took a turn you did not expect. But you can know what continued clinging is doing to your heart. You can know whether the search for answers is healing you or keeping you trapped. You can know whether your mind is becoming freer or more tangled. The craving for certainty also appears in the way people relate to themselves. A person may wait to act until they are certain they will not fail. But failure is one of life's teachers. A person may wait to speak until they are certain they will not be judged. But judgment belongs to other minds, and other minds cannot be controlled. A person may wait to change until they are certain they will not feel lonely. But loneliness may be one of the first rooms they must pass through on the way back to themselves. When certainty becomes the requirement for movement, life becomes very small. You only choose what cannot hurt you. You only love where there is no risk. You only speak where there is no possible misunderstanding. You only dream where success is guaranteed. You only walk roads that have already been walked. Then, slowly, the soul becomes tired, not because life has ended, but because life has been reduced to what fear approves. This is not freedom. It is a carefully managed prison. And because the prison is quiet, it can last for years. A person may call it personality. This is just how I am. I need to know everything. I do not like surprises. I must be in control. But Buddhist practice invites a softer honesty. Instead of turning fear into identity, you begin to see it as a passing condition. You say, fear is present. You say, the desire to control is present. You say, the mind is seeking certainty. This small shift matters. You are no longer saying, I am fear. You are saying, fear has appeared. What appears can also pass. Mindfulness helps because it brings the mind back from the imagined future into the living present. When you are mindful, you notice the breath entering and leaving. You notice the body sitting, standing, walking, resting. You notice thoughts without becoming their servant. You notice uncertainty without turning it into danger. You begin to understand that a thought about the future is not the future itself. It is only a thought. This is simple but powerful. The mind may say, something bad will happen. Mindfulness says, a fearful thought is here. The mind may say, I need to know right now. Mindfulness says, craving for certainty is here. The mind may say, I cannot handle not knowing. Mindfulness says, discomfort is here, and I am breathing with it. In this way, you stop being dragged by every mental wave. The craving for certainty loses strength when you learn to stay present with uncertainty without immediately trying to escape it. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. The mind will want to run. It will want to check, ask, search, plan, predict, and control. But if you sit quietly and breathe, you may discover something surprising. Uncertainty is a sensation before it is a story. It may feel like tightness, heat, pressure, restlessness, or heaviness. When you stay with the sensation, instead of obeying the story, the wave begins to change. This is how wisdom grows in the body, not only in the mind. You learn through experience that you can survive not knowing. You learn that a question can remain unanswered for a while without destroying you. You learn that peace is not the reward you receive after controlling everything. Peace is the capacity to remain awake inside what cannot be controlled. This does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean you stop making decisions, stop asking important questions, or stop preparing wisely. Buddhist wisdom is not laziness. It is clear seeing. You do what can be done. You speak when speech is needed. You choose when a choice is before you. You protect your dignity when a situation is harmful. But after you have done what is yours to do, you stop torturing yourself over what belongs to time, karma, other people, and changing conditions. There is a deep humility in this. The craving for certainty often comes from the ego's belief that it should be able to control more than it can. It wants to stand above life and manage every outcome. But awakening begins when you admit, I am part of life, not the owner of life. This is not defeat, it is relief. You do not have to hold the whole sky together. You do not have to solve every tomorrow tonight. You do not have to know the entire path before taking the next honest step. The next honest step is often enough. The mind resists this because it wants the whole map. It wants to see the mountain, the valley, the storm, the shelter, the ending, and the reward. But many paths are revealed only through walking. This is not because life is trying to trick you. It is because growth requires participation. Wisdom is not gained by standing outside life demanding guarantees. Wisdom is gained by meeting life directly, one breath, one step, one choice at a time. When certainty becomes a prison, the present moment feels like something to escape. You become unable to rest where you are because you are always leaning into what might happen next. Even good moments become unstable because the mind asks, how long will this last? A peaceful day becomes a setup for fear. A kind word becomes something to doubt. A new beginning becomes something to test. The mind cannot receive life because it is too busy trying to secure it. Buddhist wisdom teaches that clinging creates suffering because it turns living experiences into possessions. The mind says, this happiness must stay. Then fear begins. This person must not change. Then anxiety begins. This identity must remain. Then defensiveness begins. This plan must happen. Then disappointment begins. The craving for certainty is one of the ways clinging protects itself. It tries to make life promise not to move. But life is movement. And when you accept this, something inside softens. You may still plan, but you no longer worship the plan. You may still love, but you no longer demand that love remove all uncertainty. You may still hope, but you no longer make hope a prison. You may still feel fear, but you no longer treat fear as a command. This is the beginning of inner freedom. There is a beautiful peace that comes when you stop asking life to become completely predictable before you allow yourself to live. You begin to taste small moments again, the warmth of tea, the quiet of early morning, the sound of rain, the kindness in someone's voice, the feeling of your own breath returning. These things do not answer every question, but they bring you back to the only life you actually have. The mind may say, but what about tomorrow? Buddhist wisdom answers, meet this moment clearly, and you will meet tomorrow with a clearer heart. The mind may say, but what if I suffer? Wisdom answers, you have suffered before and awareness can help you suffer less. The mind may say, but what if things change? Wisdom answers, they will, and you can learn to change with them. This is not the kind of comfort that lies to you. It does not say nothing painful will happen. It does not say every ending will feel easy. It does not say every uncertainty will become beautiful. It says something deeper. You do not need certainty to have courage. You do not need guarantees to practice peace. You do not need to control life before you can trust your capacity to meet it. The craving for certainty weakens when trust grows. Not blind trust in people, not blind trust that everything will happen the way you want, but trust in awareness. Trust that you can pause before reacting. Trust that you can breathe before believing fear. Trust that you can learn from what comes. Trust that even when life changes, the awakened part of you can remain present. This trust is built slowly. Every time you face a small unknown without running back to old habits, trust grows. Every time you allow a question to remain open without forcing an answer, trust grows. Every time you choose the next honest step instead of demanding the whole road, trust grows. Every time you release the need to control another person's mind, trust grows. Every time you return to the breath instead of chasing a future thought, trust grows. And with trust, the prison begins to open. You may still feel uncertainty, but it no longer owns you. You may still prefer clarity, but you no longer collapse without it. You may still make plans, but you no longer mistake plans for safety itself. You may still care about outcomes, but you no longer hand your whole piece to them. You begin to understand that life was never asking you to know everything. It was asking you to be awake for what is here. This is why craving for certainty becomes a quiet prison in Buddhist wisdom. It traps the mind in future thoughts. It makes the present feel incomplete. It turns planning into fear, love into control, patience into delay, and reflection into endless mental noise. It convinces the heart that peace is waiting somewhere after the final answer, when peace can only be practiced in this breath. And when the mind sees this clearly, it stops begging the future to save it. It stops demanding guarantees from changing things. It stops treating uncertainty like a personal enemy. It begins to understand that not knowing is not always a threat. Sometimes not knowing is the doorway through which humility enters. Sometimes it is the space where trust is born. Sometimes it is the silence where wisdom finally becomes audible. So when your mind says, "I must know before I can be free," pause gently. Place one hand over the restless place inside you, even if only in spirit, and ask, "Is certainty truly what I need, or am I being invited to trust this moment more deeply?" Ask, "Have all my attempts to control the future brought me peace, or have they only made my world smaller?" Ask, "What would I do today if I did not need life to promise me tomorrow first?" These questions can loosen the bars. They can show you that the prison was built from fear, and fear can be understood. They can help you see that certainty is not the same as safety, and control is not the same as peace. They can return you to the quiet truth that the present moment, though uncertain, is still alive, still open, still offering you one breath at a time. And perhaps this is where the path deepens. After attachment has been seen, and after the craving for certainty begins to reveal its hidden chains, the heart becomes ready to face an even more subtle teaching. The way clinging can turn even pain into identity, until a person no longer knows whether they are holding the wound or the wound is holding them. And this is where the teaching becomes more personal, because once the mind stops demanding certainty, it begins to notice something even more hidden. It sees that some pain has not stayed only because it hurt. Some pain has stayed because, over time, the mind began to build a self around it. There is a kind of suffering that does not only wound the heart, it gives the heart a name. It becomes the story you tell yourself in silence, the reason you expect disappointment, the reason you keep distance, the reason you explain your anger, your fear, your distrust, your sadness, or your need to protect yourself. At first, pain enters as an experience, but when clinging touches it, pain becomes identity. This is one of the quietest traps in human life. Something hurts you, and because it hurts deeply, the mind tries to understand it. It gives it meaning. It gives it a place. It says, "This happened to me. That is natural. That is human." But slowly, if awareness is absent, the sentence changes. It is no longer, "This happened to me." It becomes, "This is who I am." And when pain becomes who you are, healing starts to feel like losing yourself. The Buddha taught that clinging creates suffering because the mind does not simply experience things and let them pass. It grabs them. It says, "This is mine, this is me, this is myself." This can happen with pleasure, success, love, beauty, respect, and comfort. But it can also happen with wounds. The mind can cling to grief, betrayal, rejection, shame, failure, loneliness, and old disappointment. Then the wound becomes more than a wound. It becomes a personal temple where the mind keeps returning to worship what hurt it. This does not mean the pain was not real. It does not mean you should dismiss what happened. It does not mean people who suffer are choosing suffering in a simple way. Pain can be heavy. Some experiences change the way the body breathes, the way the heart trusts, the way the eyes look at the world. Buddhist wisdom is not cold toward this. It does not say, just let go, as if the heart were a stone you could drop from your hand. It asks for something deeper. It asks you to see whether the pain is still moving through you, or whether you have turned it into a permanent home. There is a difference between honoring pain and becoming pain. Honoring pain means you tell the truth about what happened. You allow yourself to feel. You learn from the wound. You protect your dignity. You make wiser choices. Becoming pain means the wound becomes your name. It becomes the lens through which you see every person, every chance, every silence, every delay, and every future possibility. It no longer teaches you. It controls you. A person who has been abandoned may begin to call themselves unlovable. A person who has been betrayed may begin to call themselves foolish for trusting. A person who has failed may begin to call themselves a failure. A person who has been ignored may begin to believe they are invisible. A person who has suffered for years may begin to think peace is not meant for them. This is how pain turns into identity. The mind takes one chapter and turns it into the whole book. The danger is that identity feels more solid than emotion. An emotion can pass, a thought can change, a memory can soften, but an identity feels like truth. Once the mind says, "This is who I am," it stops questioning the cage. It begins to defend the pain as if defending life itself. If someone offers love, the pain identity becomes suspicious. If a new door opens, it whispers, "This will not last." If peace arrives, it feels unfamiliar. If kindness appears, it searches for the hidden danger, not because the person wants to suffer, but because the suffering has become a map, and without it, the mind feels lost. This is why the Buddha's teaching on clinging is so powerful. He did not only speak about outer attachment, he spoke about the deep habit of turning experience into self. The mind says, "My sadness, my anger, my fear, my wound, my story." Then, after repeating this long enough, it forgets that these things are passing conditions. It forgets that sadness is something arising, not a permanent owner. It forgets that anger is an energy, not a true self. It forgets that fear is a visitor, not the king of the house. When pain becomes identity, healing feels dangerous because healing threatens the old definition of who you are. If you have spent years being the strong one who never needs help, softness may feel like weakness. If you have spent years being the wounded one, joy may feel like betrayal. If you have spent years being the rejected one, receiving love may feel confusing. If you have spent years surviving chaos, peace may feel strangely empty. The mind asks, "Who will I be without this?" That question can keep a person trapped for a lifetime. There are people who want to be free, but they also fear becoming unknown to themselves. Their suffering has become familiar language. They know how to describe it. They know how to defend it. They know how to use it to explain why they cannot begin, cannot trust, cannot forgive, cannot rest, cannot change. But they do not yet know the language of freedom. They do not know how to speak from a self that is not built around old pain. So even when freedom comes near, they may push it away and return to what hurts, because at least there they know who they are. This is why clinging is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet refusal to let a new truth enter. Someone says, "You are not what happened to you," but the mind cannot accept it yet. Someone says, "You can begin again," but the heart feels too loyal to the old ending. Someone says, "You are allowed to be happy," but happiness feels disrespectful to the years spent suffering. The prison remains because the pain has become sacred in the wrong way. Buddhist wisdom invites us to look closely at this false sacredness. The pain may deserve compassion, but it does not deserve worship. The wound may deserve care, but it does not deserve control over your entire life. The past may deserve understanding, but it does not deserve the power to keep deciding your future. To honor what happened does not mean you must continue becoming it. Think of the mind like a person carrying a burning coal. At first, the coal was placed in their hand by life, by loss, by betrayal, by disappointment, by fear. The burning was real. But years later, the hand may still be closed around it. The person may say, "This coal explains me. This coal proves what I survived. This coal is my reason. This coal is my identity." Yet the hand is still burning. The Buddha would not shame the hand for closing. He would gently ask, "Are you ready to see that you are not the coal?" This seeing is painful at first because it removes the strange comfort of explanation. Pain can become an explanation for everything. Why you do not try, why you do not trust, why you remain guarded, why you avoid stillness, why you expect betrayal, why you reject help, why you cannot receive peace. And again, some explanations may be understandable, but if an explanation becomes a life sentence, it is no longer wisdom. It is clinging. The mind often prefers a painful identity over the uncertainty of a free one. A painful identity tells you what to expect. It says, people leave. It says, nothing works out. It says, I am always the one who suffers. It says, I cannot change. These beliefs hurt, but they also give the mind a false sense of order. If life disappoints you, the identity says, see, I told you. If someone treats you kindly, the identity says, wait, it will change. If a new path opens, the identity says, do not get excited. In this way, old pain protects itself by predicting more pain. But a life built around pain cannot fully receive beauty. Even when beauty comes, it must pass through the guards of the wound. The heart does not see what is here. It sees what happened before. It does not hear the present voice. It hears the echo of an old one. It does not meet the person in front of it. It meets the memory of someone who hurt it. This is how clinging to pain makes the present pay for the past. The Buddha taught mindfulness because mindfulness helps separate experience from identity. When sadness appears, instead of saying, I am a sad person, you begin to say, sadness is here. When fear appears, instead of saying, I am broken, you say, fear is moving through the body. When anger appears, instead of saying, this is who I am, you say, anger has arisen because something feels threatened. This simple shift weakens the illusion that passing states are permanent selves. This does not make the feeling disappear instantly, but it changes your relationship with it. You are no longer drowning inside the emotion. You are witnessing it. You are no longer bowing before the old story. You are listening with awareness. You are no longer tightening around pain as identity. You are allowing pain to be seen as something conditioned, something arising from causes, something that can change when the conditions change. This is one of the deepest mercies of Buddhist wisdom. What has arisen from conditions is not fixed. If distrust arose from betrayal, then with time, awareness, right boundaries, and safe experience, new trust can slowly arise. If shame arose from harsh words, then with compassion, understanding, and truth, shame can soften. If fear arose from loss, then with patient presence, fear can learn that not every moment is the old moment returning. If bitterness arose from unhealed grief, then with honest mourning, the bitterness can lose its job. Pain becomes identity when the mind stops seeing causes and starts seeing destiny. It says, because I was hurt, I am now this forever. But Buddhist wisdom says, because this arose from causes, new causes can support release. This is not quick, it is not magical, but it is possible. The mind is not a statue, the heart is not a locked room. Even old wounds are not as fixed as clinging makes them appear. The danger of clinging to pain is that it can make a person unconsciously loyal to the very suffering they pray to escape. They may say they want peace, but they reject peaceful people because peace feels strange. They may say they want love, but they test love until it breaks. They may say they want a new life, but they keep repeating the habits of the old one. They may say they want freedom, but they keep returning to conversations, memories, and patterns that renew the wound. This is not because they are foolish. It is because pain has become familiar identity, and the mind protects identity even when identity hurts. To release pain as identity, you must first stop blaming yourself for having made it one. The mind builds identity from pain as a survival method. When something hurts deeply, the mind tries to create rules so it will not happen again. It says, never trust too much. It says, never need anyone. It says, always expect the worst. It says, stay guarded. These rules may have helped you survive a season, but survival rules can become suffering when the season changes and the rules remain. There are defenses that once protected the heart, but later imprison it. A child who learned silence to avoid conflict may become an adult who cannot speak their truth. A person who learned independence after being abandoned may become someone who cannot receive care. A person who learned suspicion after betrayal may become someone who cannot rest in love. A person who learned emotional hardness to survive pain may become someone who feels lonely behind their own walls. At one time, the defense had a purpose. But the Buddha's path asks, is this still skillful now? This question is gentle but powerful. Is this belief still protecting you, or is it keeping you from living? Is this identity still necessary, or is it only familiar? Is this pain still asking to be felt, or has the mind turned it into a permanent mask? Is this story helping you awaken, or is it keeping you asleep inside the past? When clinging turns pain into identity, the person may begin to seek evidence that confirms the wound. If they believe they are unwanted, they notice every delay, every quiet tone, every missed call, every small distance. If they believe they are doomed to fail, they notice every mistake more than every effort. If they believe people cannot be trusted, they interpret uncertainty as betrayal. This is how identity shapes perception. The mind does not simply see life. It sees through what it is attached to. Buddhist practice is the art of seeing itself. You do not only ask, what is happening? You ask, through what lens am I looking? Am I seeing this moment clearly, or am I seeing it through old rejection? Am I hearing this person, or am I hearing the past? Am I responding to what is true now, or am I defending the identity of the wounded self? These questions bring light to the hidden places. And when light enters, choice becomes possible. Without awareness, the pain identity reacts automatically. It hears disagreement and feels attacked. It hears silence and feels abandoned. It faces delay and feels worthless. It meets change and feels unsafe. But with awareness, even if the old reaction rises, you can pause. You can say, this feeling is old. You can say, this fear may not belong entirely to this moment. You can say, I do not have to become the wound again. That pause is not small. It is liberation beginning in real time. The Buddha taught that clinging binds us to suffering because clinging keeps renewing what could otherwise pass. A painful memory may arise naturally. That is not the problem. The problem begins when the mind feeds it, repeats it, decorates it, identifies with it, and then uses it to define reality. A memory comes as a visitor, but clinging gives it a permanent room. A feeling comes as weather, but clinging calls it climate. A wound comes as an event, but clinging turns it into a self. This is why the practice is not to destroy memory. Memory has its place. It teaches, protects, and helps us understand. The practice is to stop letting memory rule perception. The past can be a teacher, but it becomes suffering when it becomes a master. The past can guide discernment, but it becomes a prison when it forbids new life. The past can explain certain fears, but it should not be allowed to become the final authority over who you are allowed to become. A person may think that releasing pain as identity means the pain no longer mattered. This is one of the deepest fears. If I am no longer the wounded one, was the wound meaningless? If I stop carrying grief every day, does that mean I did not love deeply? If I heal from what they did, does that mean they got away with it? If I become peaceful, does that mean the past was acceptable? No. Healing does not erase truth. Peace does not excuse harm. Letting go does not declare that what happened was right. It simply means you no longer allow what happened to keep happening inside you every day. You can remember without reopening. You can learn without hardening. You can honor without clinging. You can tell the truth without living chained to it. This is hard because pain sometimes feels like proof. Proof that you loved, proof that you survived, proof that you were wronged, proof that your story matters. But your story does not need your endless suffering in order to matter. Love does not require permanent bleeding. Survival does not require permanent fear. Justice does not require your inner life to remain destroyed. You can carry wisdom instead of wounds. You can carry boundaries instead of bitterness. You can carry compassion instead of self-punishment. The Buddha's teaching points toward release, not denial. Denial says, nothing happened. Release says, it happened, and I am no longer willing to become only that. Denial pushes pain into darkness. Release brings pain into awareness until it no longer needs to rule. Denial pretends the wound is not there. Release tends to the wound without building a throne for it. When pain becomes identity, people often confuse healing with becoming someone else. But healing is not becoming a stranger, it is becoming less trapped. It is meeting parts of yourself that were hidden beneath survival. You may discover tenderness beneath anger. You may discover courage beneath fear. You may discover joy beneath grief. You may discover simplicity beneath overthinking. You may discover that the self you were defending was not your full self, only the self formed around injury. This discovery can feel tender. Sometimes when people begin to heal, they grieve how long they lived inside the old story. They grieve the years spent expecting pain. They grieve the relationships they pushed away. They grieve the opportunities they did not take. They grieve the peace they did not believe they deserved. This grief is not failure. It is part of waking up. When the cage opens, you may cry for the time spent inside it. But those tears can become cleansing, not another identity. There is no need to turn healing into pressure. The mind that has clung to pain for years may not release it in one night. It may return to the old story many times. The practice is to notice sooner, return gently, and stop adding shame to the process. Shame is another form of clinging. It says, I should be different by now. Awareness says, this is the moment I have. Let me meet it clearly. The path is not walked by hatred of the old self, but by compassion for the self that learned to survive. Compassion is important because the wounded identity often formed when the heart did not feel safe enough to be open. If you attack it, it will tighten. If you shame it, it will hide. If you force it, it will resist. But if you bring patient awareness, it may begin to soften. You can say to the wounded part of yourself, I see why you held on. I see why you were afraid. I see how hard you tried to protect me. But we do not have to live only from this place anymore. This is not weakness. This is mature inner practice. It recognizes that the parts of you built from pain need understanding before they can release control. The Buddha's path is not a war against yourself. It is awakening from confusion. It is seeing that what you called self may only be a collection of habits, fears, memories, and reactions arising and passing through awareness. This is also why the teaching of non-self is so freeing, though it can sound frightening at first. Non-self does not mean you do not exist. It means the fixed, permanent, unchanging self you keep defending cannot be found in the way the mind imagines. What you call me is always changing. Thoughts change, feelings change, roles change, the body changes, desires change, beliefs change, even pain changes. So when the mind says, "I am my wound," Buddhist wisdom asks, can this wound be permanent if everything that makes it up is changing? Look closely. The pain you felt on the first day is not exactly the same as the pain you feel now. Its intensity changed, its meaning changed, its timing changed. Some days it was heavy, some days it was quiet. Some moments you forgot it, some moments it returned. This means it is not a solid self. It is a changing process, and what changes can be related to differently. The mind may cling to pain because pain gives a sense of continuity. It says, "This is the thread that connects all my years." But awareness can become a deeper thread. Instead of being connected by suffering, your life can become connected by learning. Instead of saying, "I am the one who was hurt," you may begin to say, "I am the one who is learning to see clearly." Instead of saying, "I am broken," you may begin to say, "Something in me was wounded, and something in me is awake enough to care for it." This change in language matters because language shapes inner reality. When you keep saying, "I am damaged," the mind bows to that identity. When you say, "Pain is present, but awareness is also present," you create space. When you say, "I have carried this for a long time," you leave room to put it down. When you say, "This story shaped me, but it does not have to finish me," you begin to reclaim movement. The Buddha taught that suffering can end, but not by clinging to the one who suffers. This is subtle. Sometimes people want suffering to end while keeping the suffering identity intact. They want peace, but they still want the old story to remain the center. They want freedom, but they still want to be defined by the cage. True release asks for more. It asks you not only to let go of pain, but to let go of the self-image formed around pain. This may be why healing can feel like emptiness before it feels like peace. When you are no longer repeating the old story, there may be silence. When you no longer identify as the wounded one, there may be uncertainty. When you no longer organize your life around proving, defending, or protecting the pain, you may wonder what to do with your energy. This empty space is not a mistake. It is the clearing where a freer life can grow. Do not rush to fill it with another identity. Do not say, "Now I must become perfectly healed, perfectly calm, perfectly wise." That is just another cage, painted with spiritual colors. Instead, let yourself be simple. Let yourself be a person breathing, a person learning, a person who still feels but is not owned by every feeling. A person who remembers but is not imprisoned by every memory. A person who has suffered but is not only suffering. This is the middle path of healing. You do not deny pain, and you do not worship it. You do not pretend to be untouched, and you do not make the wound your crown. You walk with honesty. You let what hurts be seen. You let what is old be questioned. You let what is passing pass. You let awareness become larger than the story. And slowly, the identity begins to loosen. You may notice it in small moments. A memory comes, and you do not follow it as far as before. Someone's silence appears, and you do not immediately turn it into rejection. A fear rises, and you breathe instead of obeying. A chance for joy comes, and you allow yourself to receive it without guilt. A part of you wants to repeat the old sentence, "This always happens to me," but another part quietly says, "Maybe not this time." These moments are not small. They are the old self losing its absolute power. The path of awakening is often made of such quiet victories. No one sees them. No one knows how much strength it took not to become the wound again. But inside, something changes. The mind begins to understand that pain can be part of your history without being your identity. The heart begins to trust that releasing the story does not mean betraying itself. The body begins to learn that safety does not always require hardness. The soul begins to feel that freedom is not emptiness, but space. This is why the Buddha taught that clinging can turn even pain into identity. Because the mind, when unaware, does not only suffer from what happens, it suffers from the self it builds around what happens. It takes pain, names it me, protects it, repeats it, and then fears the freedom that would dissolve it. But with awareness, the same pain can become a doorway. It can show you where you are still attached. It can show you what part of you is asking for compassion. It can show you what story is ready to be released. So when old pain rises and says, "This is who you are," do not fight it with anger. Look at it with steady eyes. Ask, "Are you a truth? Or are you a wound asking to be understood?" Ask, "Are you guiding me, or are you keeping me trapped?" Ask, "Can I honor what happened without becoming it again?" In that gentle questioning, the grip begins to loosen. You are not required to erase your past. You are not required to feel nothing. You are not required to become untouched by life. But you are invited to stop mistaking the wound for the whole of you. You are invited to let pain be a teacher, not an identity. You are invited to see that the self built around suffering can soften, change, and finally bow to something deeper. And as this becomes clear, another truth begins to open. If pain is not fixed, if identity is not fixed, if even the wounded self is changing, then the person you keep trying to protect is also changing. This leads into the next teaching, where impermanence reveals that the self you are defending so tightly may already be dissolving, reshaping, and becoming something new with every breath. And once you begin to see that pain is not the whole of who you are, another deeper truth begins to rise quietly. The self you have been defending so tightly is not standing still. The one you are trying to protect, explain, prove, preserve, and carry into every tomorrow is already changing with every breath. This is the truth the mind does not want to face at first. You cannot protect a fixed self because no fixed self can be found. The person you were yesterday has already moved. The person who suffered years ago is not exactly the same person sitting here now. The body has changed, the thoughts have changed, the desires have changed, the fears have changed. Even the wound you thought would never shift has changed its shape many times. Yet the mind keeps building walls around an old version of you, as if that version can still be saved from life. Impermanence is not only something that happens outside you. It is not only the fading flower, the changing weather, the passing years, or the people who come and go. Impermanence is happening inside you. It is happening in your mood, your breath, your beliefs, your memories, your longings, your reactions, your body, your sense of meaning, and your understanding of yourself. You are not watching change from a distance. You are change, appearing moment by moment. This is why the Buddha's wisdom is so uncomfortable and so freeing at the same time. It tells the mind, look closely. The thing you are clinging to as yourself is not solid. The mind hears this and feels afraid because it wants identity to be firm. It wants to say, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is what I must protect, this is the story that explains me. But life does not hold still long enough for those sentences to remain completely true. Think about the person you were 10 years ago. Their worries felt urgent. Their desires felt important. Their beliefs felt certain. Their fears felt real. Their plans may have seemed final. They probably thought they understood themselves. But look now. Some things that once mattered deeply may no longer move you. Some people you thought you could not live without may now live only as memory. Some dreams may have faded, and some new ones may have appeared. Some pain you thought would end, you may have become something you survived. If the self were fixed, none of this would be possible. The mind struggles with this because it confuses continuity with permanence. You remember your past, so you feel like the same person. You have the same name, the same face in a familiar mirror, the same history, the same family lines, the same memories, and some of the same habits. So the mind says, I am one solid thing moving through time. But Buddhist wisdom looks deeper. It sees that what you call me is more like a flame passed from moment to moment. The flame appears continuous, but it is never exactly the same flame. It is always changing, always being renewed by conditions. This does not mean you are nothing. It means you are not the fixed thing your fear is trying to defend. You are a living process. You are a gathering of conditions, experiences, choices, memories, sensations, habits, and awareness. Some of these have been with you for a long time, but long-lasting is not the same as permanent. A cloud may stretch across the sky for hours, but it is still changing. A river may keep the same name for centuries, but the water is never the same. In the same way, you may carry the same name and story, but the life moving through you is never frozen. This truth matters because much of suffering comes from defending an old self that is already passing away. The mind says, I must remain who I have always been. But who is that? The frightened child, the abandoned lover, the person who failed once, the one who was praised, the one who was rejected, the one who survived by becoming hard, the one who learned to please everyone, the one who stopped trusting, the one who built a whole identity from one season of pain. When you look closely, you begin to see that each version of you was formed by conditions. The child version of you was shaped by what was available then. The younger version of you was shaped by what they knew, what they lacked, what they feared, and what they hoped for. The wounded version of you was shaped by pain. The guarded version of you was shaped by disappointment. The ambitious version of you may have been shaped by hunger for approval. The quiet version may have been shaped by fear of being misunderstood. None of these selves were false, but none of them were final. The mind fears this because if none of them are final, then the identity it has been protecting loses its solid ground. But this is not bad news. This is liberation. If the old self is not fixed, you do not have to keep obeying it. If fear was created by conditions, new conditions can soften it. If bitterness was learned, tenderness can be relearned. If silence became your shield, truthful speech can become your freedom. If you became small to survive, you can slowly become spacious again. Impermanence reveals that you are not trapped inside the first version of yourself that learned how to cope. This is one of the greatest gifts of Buddhist wisdom. It says, you are changing already. Stop treating your old patterns as your prison sentence. The mind may say, this is just how I am, but awareness asks, is it truly who I am, or is it what I repeated until it felt natural? The mind may say, I cannot change. Awareness asks, have I not already changed many times? The mind may say, this pain is permanent. Awareness asks, has its intensity not risen and fallen like every other wave? When you see this clearly, you stop believing every old identity as if it was sacred law. You begin to understand that some parts of you are memories asking for compassion, not masters demanding obedience. Some reactions are old protections, not present wisdom. Some beliefs are inherited fears, not timeless truths. Some desires are echoes of unmet needs, not proof of who you must remain. This is why impermanence does not only show that life changes, it shows that the I who resists life is also changing. The one who says, "I cannot handle this," is not fixed. The one who says, "I will always be this way," is not fixed. The one who says, "I need things to stay the same," is not fixed. Even resistance is changing. Some days it is strong, some days it weakens. Some moments you cling, some moments you breathe. Some moments you believe the old story, some moments you see through it. This movement is evidence that freedom is possible. The self you are protecting is often a picture created from the past. The mind takes memories, pain, praise, shame, loss, dreams, and labels, then arranges them into a portrait and says, "This is me." Then, whenever life threatens that portrait, fear rises. If change asks you to grow, the portrait trembles. If truth asks you to admit you were wrong, the portrait trembles. If healing asks you to release the wound, the portrait trembles. If love asks you to be open, the portrait trembles. If peace asks you to stop fighting, the portrait trembles. But you are not the portrait. You are the awareness that can see the portrait. This is important because the mind often protects identity more fiercely than peace. Someone may remain in a role that drains them because they have always been the responsible one. Someone may keep hiding their needs because they have always been the strong one. Someone may refuse help because they have always been the independent one. Someone may keep replaying injustice because they have always been the one who was wronged. Someone may avoid joy because they have always been the one who suffers quietly. These roles may have once helped the person belong, survive, or make sense of life. But impermanence asks, does this role still serve awakening? A role can become a cage when you forget it is a role. The responsible one may need rest. The strong one may need comfort. The independent one may need connection. The wounded one may need permission to heal. The careful one may need courage. The quiet one may need a voice. The person you have been protecting may not need more defense. They may need release. This is where Buddhist wisdom becomes tender. It does not ask you to destroy the old self. It asks you to see that the old self was never solid enough to destroy. It was a pattern. It was a response. It was a collection of conditions. You do not have to hate it. You do not have to fight it. You can bow to it with gratitude and say, "You helped me survive," but you do not have to lead every step now. There is grief in this. When a self begins to change, something familiar dissolves. Even when the old self was painful, it may feel like home because you knew its rooms. You knew how to behave there. You knew what to expect. You knew how to explain your life from that place. Letting it soften can feel like walking into open space without a map. The mind may panic and say, "Come back, at least we knew who we were." But the heart may quietly answer, "Yes, but we were not free." Growth often feels like betrayal to the old self. When you stop responding the old way, something inside may accuse you. It may say you are becoming selfish. It may say you are forgetting your past. It may say you are abandoning what made you strong. It may say you are unsafe without the old walls, but not every inner voice is wisdom. Some voices are fear trying to survive. Some are old conditioning trying to remain important. Some are attachments speaking in the language of identity. This is why mindfulness matters again. Without mindfulness, you believe every old voice. With mindfulness, you can hear the voice and still ask whether it is useful. You can feel fear and still choose tenderness. You can feel the old identity pulling you backward and still take one small step forward. You can notice the desire to protect a past version of yourself and gently ask, "Is this version still here, or am I carrying an image?" The body itself teaches impermanence every day. You breathe in, and the breath becomes breath out. Hunger comes, then passes. Tiredness comes, then shifts. A feeling tightens the chest, then softens. Tears rise, then dry. Even pain in the body changes from sharp to dull, from intense to quiet, from present to absent. The body is not a fixed object. It is a field of changing sensations. If even the body you call mine is changing moment by moment, how can the identity built around it be fixed? The mind does the same. Thoughts appear without asking. They stay for a while, then leave. You do not know your next thought before it arrives. You cannot keep one thought forever. Even the thought, "I am this kind of person," comes and goes. It feels strong when you believe it, but when attention moves, it fades. This shows that identity depends on attention. What you feed becomes strong. What you observe without feeding begins to loosen. This is both serious and hopeful. If you keep feeding the old self with the same stories, the old self feels permanent. If you keep saying, "I am too damaged, I am too late, I am always abandoned, I cannot trust, I never change," those thoughts become familiar grooves. But if you begin to observe them instead of worshipping them, their authority weakens. They may still appear, but they do not have to command your life. A thought can visit without becoming a ruler. Impermanence also reveals that the future self is not waiting somewhere fully formed. It is being shaped now through attention, action, intention, and awareness. Every time you choose patience over reaction, you shape the future mind. Every time you choose honesty over hiding, you shape the future heart. Every time you return to the breath instead of chasing fear, you shape the future nervous system. Every time you release one old story, you make space for another way of being. This is karma in a simple, living sense. Not punishment from the sky, not a mysterious force waiting to harm you, but the unfolding of causes and effects. What you repeat becomes a path. What you practice becomes easier to return to. What you feed grows. What you stop feeding begins to weaken. The self is shaped by these movements. So when you say, "This is who I am," Buddhist wisdom asks, "What have you been practicing?" This question is not meant to shame you. It is meant to awaken responsibility without cruelty. Maybe you have practiced fear because fear once felt necessary. Maybe you have practiced resentment because grief had nowhere to go. Maybe you have practiced silence because speaking was once unsafe. Maybe you have practiced control because uncertainty once overwhelmed you. The point is not to judge the practice. The point is to see that a practice can change. A person who has practiced worry can practice trust in small ways. A person who has practiced self-blame can practice compassion. A person who has practiced avoidance can practice one honest conversation. A person who has practiced clinging can practice letting one breath pass without reaching backward. These small practices matter because the self is not changed only by great dramatic decisions. It is changed by repeated inner movements. This is why the present moment is so powerful. It may look small, but it is the only place where the self is being formed. The past has already given its conditions. The future has not arrived. This moment is where you can see, pause, choose, soften, breathe, release, or return. If you miss this moment because you are defending an old self, the old pattern continues. If you meet this moment with awareness, a new condition enters the stream. The self you are protecting may be built from old conclusions. At one point, you may have concluded, "It is safer not to trust." At another point, "I must do everything alone." At another point, "My feelings are too much." At another point, "Change brings loss." These conclusions may have made sense when they formed, but impermanence means the conditions that created them may no longer be the same. You are older now. You have more understanding now. You have survived things you once feared. You have seen more of life. You may have access to choices you did not have before. Yet the mind often keeps living by conclusions made in earlier pain. It treats old survival decisions as present truth. This is like wearing clothes that no longer fit because they once protected you from cold. At some point, what once covered you begins to restrict you. Buddhist wisdom asks you to examine your inner clothing. What are you still wearing that belongs to an old season? What belief, defense, role, or fear are you carrying because it once helped you survive, even though now it keeps you small? Impermanence is not asking you to throw away your whole past. It is asking you to stop mistaking the past for a permanent identity. Your past is a teacher, but a teacher is not meant to sit on your chest forever. Your wounds are part of your path, but they are not the entire path. Your old self deserves compassion, but not permanent control. If life is changing, and you are changing with it, then every moment carries the possibility of a wiser response. This is why protecting the old self can become suffering. Protection sounds kind, but sometimes what we call protection is refusal. Refusal to grow, refusal to receive. Refusal to admit change has already happened. Refusal to let a new truth replace an old defense. The mind says, I am protecting myself. But awareness may see, I am protecting a fear. The mind says, I know who I am. But awareness may see, I know who I was when I was afraid. There is a great difference between self-respect and self-attachment. Self-respect honors your dignity, your boundaries, your body, your peace, and your path. Self-attachment clings to a fixed image and resists anything that challenges it. Self-respect can change because it is rooted in wisdom. Self-attachment cannot easily change because it is rooted in fear. Self-respect says, I am allowed to grow. Self-attachment says, I must remain familiar to myself. The Buddha's teaching on impermanence gently breaks self-attachment. It shows that you have never remained completely familiar to yourself. You have surprised yourself before. You have outgrown desires before. You have changed opinions before. You have healed in places you thought would always ache. You have become stronger in ways you did not plan. You have survived days that once looked impossible from a distance. If change has already carried you this far, why assume it can only harm you now? Sometimes the fear of change is really the fear of losing an identity that gave you a sense of control. If you are the one who never needs anyone, then needing someone feels dangerous. If you are the one who always understands, then confusion feels shameful. If you are the one who keeps everyone happy, then disappointing someone feels like death. If you are the one who endures, then leaving feels like failure. These identities are not just thoughts, they are emotional contracts. Impermanence asks whether you are ready to stop signing them. This can be unsettling because identities often bring approval. People may have praised you for the very role that now exhausts you. They may have praised your strength when you were actually lonely. They may have praised your patience when you were quietly abandoning yourself. They may have praised your independence when you secretly wanted support. They may have praised your calm when you were only hiding pain. Now, as you change, some people may not understand. They may prefer the version of you that served their comfort. This is another reason the mind protects the old self. Change may disturb relationships built around your old role. When you stop being endlessly available, some people may call you distant. When you speak honestly, some may call you difficult. When you rest, some may call you selfish. When you stop carrying what is not yours, some may say you have changed. And they may be right. You have changed. But not all change is betrayal. Some change is the return of dignity. Buddhist wisdom does not encourage harshness. It encourages clear seeing. You do not need to become cruel to become free. You do not need to reject everyone to grow. But you do need to understand that preserving an old self just to keep others comfortable can become a hidden form of suffering. If the self is already changing, then forcing it to remain small is like trying to keep a tree inside a seed. The seed served its purpose, but the tree must break it. This is how impermanence becomes awakening. It shows that what feels like loss may sometimes be growth. The old shell cracks and the mind cries, something is wrong. But the deeper life says, something is opening. A familiar identity fades, and the mind cries, I am disappearing. But wisdom says, a false boundary is dissolving. A role no longer fits, and the mind cries, I do not know who I am. But awareness says, good, now you can discover without clinging. Not knowing who you are can be frightening, but it can also be sacred. It means the old labels have loosened. It means the mind is less trapped by yesterday's definitions. It means there is space to meet yourself directly, without forcing every feeling into an old name. In that space, you may discover that you are not required to be one fixed thing. You can be strong and tender, careful and brave, independent and connected, grieving and grateful, quiet and honest, healing and still imperfect. Human life is wider than the identities fear creates. Impermanence also softens shame. Shame says, because I did something wrong, I am wrong forever. But impermanence says, actions have causes, consequences, and lessons, but the mind can learn. Shame says, I am trapped in what I used to be. Impermanence says, the past has shaped you, but the present is still active. Shame says, there is no way back. Impermanence says, there may not be a way back, but there can be a way forward. This matters deeply because many people protect an old self out of guilt. They keep punishing themselves because they believe they must remain loyal to regret. They think becoming peaceful would mean they have not taken responsibility. But responsibility does not require endless self-torment. True responsibility means seeing clearly, making amends where possible, learning deeply, and refusing to repeat the harm. Shame freezes the self around the mistake. Wisdom allows the mistake to become a cause for awakening. The self you are protecting may also be an ideal self, not only a wounded one, but a perfect image you are afraid to lose. The mind may cling to being seen as good, wise, successful, spiritual, kind, attractive, generous, or unshakable. Then, when life reveals anger, weakness, confusion, jealousy, fatigue, or fear, the mind suffers because the image cracks. But impermanence reveals that no image can contain the whole human being. You are not a polished statue. You are a living process, and living processes include weather. Spiritual growth does not mean building a perfect self and defending it. It means becoming less deceived by the need for a fixed self at all. Even the identity of being spiritual can become another attachment. A person may cling to being calm, then feel ashamed when anger arises. They may cling to being detached, then feel frightened when desire appears. They may cling to being wise, then hide confusion. But the path is not performance. The path is honest seeing. If anger appears, see it. If desire appears, see it. If confusion appears, see it. What is seen clearly can teach. What is hidden to protect an image becomes another chain. This is why impermanence is both humbling and merciful. It humbles the ego because it shows that no identity is final. It comforts the heart because it shows that no suffering is final either. The same truth that takes away false certainty also opens the door to healing. If everything changes, then pain can change, fear can change, patterns can change, relationships to memory can change, the way you speak to yourself can change, the way you meet life can change. Of course, change does not always move at the speed the mind wants. Some patterns are deep, some fears have been repeated for many years. Some wounds need care, patience, and support, but slow change is still change. A mountain path is not climbed in one leap. A river shapes stone over time. A heart softens through repeated moments of awareness. Do not disrespect small shifts. The mind that pauses 1 second before reacting has changed. The heart that admits one honest feeling has changed. The body that takes one deeper breath instead of tightening has changed. The old self may not disappear, but it can lose control. It may still visit, especially during stress. You may still hear old thoughts. You may still feel old fears. This does not mean you have failed. Impermanence does not mean old patterns never return. It means they do not have to remain in charge. Each return becomes another opportunity to see, not another proof that you are trapped. This is a compassionate way to understand practice. You are not trying to create a final self that never struggles again. You are learning to relate wisely to whatever arises. Some days the fearful self appears. Some days the peaceful self appears. Some days the wounded self appears. Some days the generous self appears. Instead of clinging to one and rejecting another, awareness holds them all as passing conditions. This is freedom from the tyranny of fixed identity. When you stop protecting a fixed self, you become more available to life. You can listen without needing to defend your image. You can apologize without feeling destroyed. You can learn without feeling small. You can change direction without calling yourself a failure. You can receive love without forcing it through old fear. You can let others change without treating their growth as betrayal. You can let yourself change without asking permission from your past. This is where peace becomes practical. The person who understands impermanence is not shocked by every shift. They may still feel sadness, but not the added suffering of believing change should not happen. They may still feel fear, but not the added suffering of believing fear defines them. They may still feel loss, but not the added suffering of believing life has ended because one form has passed. They learn to move with life, not because they are careless, but because they are awake. There is deep power in saying, "I am changing," not as a threat, but as truth. I am changing, so I do not have to keep repeating what hurts. I am changing, so I do not have to defend every old belief. I am changing, so I can forgive the version of me that did not know. I am changing, so I can release the version of me that only survived. I am changing, so I can meet this moment with fresh eyes. And maybe the self you are protecting so fiercely does not need protection from change. Maybe it needs protection from being frozen. Maybe the greatest kindness is not to keep yourself the same, but to allow yourself to become more honest, more awake, more compassionate, more free. The mind fears impermanence because it thinks change will take the self away. But impermanence also reveals that the self was never a fixed object to be taken. It was always a movement, a river, a flame, a breathing field of conditions. The more clearly you see this, the less you need to defend every old version of you. You can bow to what was, learn from what came, release what has passed, and meet what is forming now. This is not a loss of self, it is the loss of illusion. And behind that illusion, something quieter remains. Awareness, presence, the simple knowing that is here before the story becomes loud. The part of you that can watch thoughts come and go, the part that can feel fear without being only fear, the part that can notice change without becoming lost in it. This awareness is not another identity to decorate. It is the open space in which identities arise and pass. When you rest there, even briefly, you understand why the Buddha pointed toward impermanence as a doorway to freedom. Because once you see that everything is changing, you stop demanding that life preserve what was never fixed. You stop using all your strength to guard old shapes. You stop mistaking movement for danger. You stop asking the past to define the future. You begin to let life breathe. And from that breath, a new tenderness becomes possible. You can look at your old self with compassion instead of shame. You can look at your changing self with patience instead of fear. You can look at the unknown self ahead with curiosity instead of control. You do not need to know exactly who you are becoming before you allow the becoming to begin. So when the mind tightens around identity and says, "This is who I am, this is who I must remain," pause and look closer. Is that truly the self, or only a familiar pattern? Is it wisdom or memory? Is it dignity or defense? Is it alive, or is it something already passing away? Let the question breathe. Let it open space. Let it remind you that you are not required to protect every old version of yourself from the truth of change. The self you are protecting is already changing. The one who was hurt is changing. The one who is afraid is changing. The one who clings is changing. The one who listens is changing. Even the one who resists this teaching is changing. Nothing in you is as fixed as fear claims. And because of that, freedom is not far away. It is hidden inside the movement you have been resisting. And once this becomes clear, the next truth begins to unfold naturally. If you are changing, if identity is changing, if pain is changing, then suffering grows deepest when the mind tries to stop life itself from moving. This is where the path turns toward the next lesson, why the mind suffers when it tries to keep life from moving. And when you begin to see that the self you are protecting is already changing, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. If you are not fixed, if your pain is not fixed, if your identity is not fixed, then life itself was never meant to be held still. The mind suffers because it keeps trying to do the impossible. It tries to stop the river, pause the season, freeze the feeling, preserve the moment, and command the future to move only in the direction it prefers. There is a deep sadness in trying to keep life from moving. The heart knows something has changed, but the mind keeps arguing with it. The door has closed, but the mind keeps standing there. The person has become different, but the mind keeps speaking to who they used to be. The season has passed, but the mind keeps dressing for yesterday's weather. This is how suffering begins quietly, not because life moves, but because the mind refuses to move with it. Buddhist wisdom teaches that life is a flow of arising and passing. Nothing appears without changing. Nothing stays without eventually shifting. Every breath is proof. The moment you breathe in, that breath is already preparing to leave. The moment a sound reaches your ear, it is already fading. The moment joy rises, it has already begun to change form. The moment sadness appears, it is not frozen either. Life is not a picture hanging on a wall. It is a river carrying everything forward. But the mind wants life to behave like a picture. It wants one perfect moment to remain. It wants one person to stay the same. It wants one identity to last. It wants one feeling to be permanent. It wants one answer to settle every question. So when life moves, the mind feels betrayed. It says, "Why did this change? Why did they change? Why did I change? Why could it not stay the way it was?" Yet the question itself creates suffering, because it asks life to become what life has never been. The mind suffers when it tries to keep life from moving, because resistance turns natural change into personal punishment. A relationship changes, and the mind says, "I am being abandoned." A plan fails, and the mind says, "Life is against me." The body ages, and the mind says, "I am losing myself." A season ends, and the mind says, "I will never feel whole again." But change is not always rejection. Change is not always punishment. Change is often simply the nature of conditions shifting. This does not mean change is painless. Some changes break the heart open. Some endings arrive before you are ready. Some losses leave silence where warmth used to be. Some transitions make you feel like the ground has forgotten how to hold you. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to smile at every loss or pretend that movement never hurts. It asks you to see clearly where the pain ends and resistance begins. Pain may come when something changes. Suffering deepens when the mind says, "This should not be happening." Pain may come when someone leaves. Suffering deepens when the mind says, "They must return before I can breathe." Pain may come when a dream ends. Suffering deepens when the mind says, "My life has no meaning without this dream." Pain belongs to being human. Suffering grows when the mind fights reality after reality has already arrived. There is a difference between grief and resistance. Grief says, "This mattered, and I feel the ache of its passing." Resistance says, "This must not pass." Grief is honest. Resistance is war. Grief flows like rain through the heart. Resistance builds a dam and then wonders why the pressure becomes unbearable. When grief is allowed to move, it changes. When resistance locks it inside, it hardens. This is why many people remain trapped in pain long after the first wound. The original event may have happened once, but resistance repeats it daily. The mind keeps replaying what should have been said, what should have happened, who should have stayed, how life should have unfolded. It creates a second world where the past is still being negotiated, but the body is living now, the breath is happening now, the day is moving now. The mind is somewhere else, trying to correct a moment that no longer exists. This split creates exhaustion. Part of you is in the present, doing ordinary things. Another part is in the past, holding court with memory. Another part is in the future, trying to prevent the next disappointment. The mind becomes scattered across time, and peace becomes difficult because peace can only happen where you are. When the mind refuses to move with life, it loses contact with the only moment that can heal it. The Buddha's path brings attention back to what is actually happening, not what the mind wishes were happening, not what the heart fears will happen, not what memory keeps repeating. What is happening now? There is breath, there is sensation, there is a feeling rising, there is a thought passing. There is resistance in the chest. There is sadness in the throat. There is fear in the belly. When you come back this way, life becomes workable again. You cannot work with yesterday's ghost. You can only work with what is present. The mind suffers because it wants to control movement by naming it danger. It says, "If things change, I am unsafe." But not every movement is a threat. Sometimes movement is correction. Sometimes movement is growth. Sometimes movement is release. Sometimes movement is life removing what your fear kept defending. Sometimes movement is the truth arriving after illusion has become too heavy to carry. A person may suffer because a relationship no longer feels the same. The mind may fight this change, trying to bring back the beginning, the excitement, the words, the attention, the old rhythm. But perhaps the relationship is revealing something true. Perhaps it needs honesty. Perhaps it needs a new form. Perhaps it has completed its season. Perhaps it was never as safe as hope made it appear. The suffering becomes sharper when the mind demands that the relationship return to a version that no longer exists. A person may suffer because their own inner life has changed. Something that once satisfied them no longer feels meaningful. A role that once gave them pride now feels empty. A place that once felt like home now feels too small. Instead of listening, the mind may panic. It may say, "Something is wrong with me." But sometimes nothing is wrong. Sometimes the heart has outgrown the container it once needed. The suffering comes from trying to keep wearing a life that no longer fits. This is where many people become cruel to themselves. They feel change inside and call it confusion. They feel growth and call it instability. They feel the old life becoming heavy and call themselves ungrateful. They feel the truth rising and call it trouble. But inner movement is not always a problem to solve. Sometimes it is a message to hear. The heart may be saying, "I cannot keep pretending, this still nourishes me." Buddhist wisdom asks for right understanding. Right understanding does not rush, it does not react blindly, it does not chase every feeling. It simply sees that movement is natural and asks what the movement is teaching. When a feeling changes, you do not immediately panic, you observe. When a plan changes, you do not immediately collapse, you breathe. When a person changes, you do not immediately try to control them, you look clearly. When life changes, you do not immediately call it disaster. You ask, what is being revealed? The mind suffers because it believes stillness means safety, but there is a difference between inner stillness and outer stagnation. Inner stillness is the calm awareness that can be present while life moves. Stagnation is the refusal to allow life to move at all. One is peace, the other is fear. A pond can look still because it is clear and balanced. Another pond can look still because nothing is flowing through it, and underneath it is becoming stale. The mind often mistakes the second for safety. Real peace is not life staying unchanged. Real peace is the ability to remain awake while life changes. It is the ability to say, "This is not what I expected, but I can meet it." It is the ability to feel sadness without becoming lost. It is the ability to lose one form without believing all meaning has ended. It is the ability to let a chapter close without tearing apart the whole book. When the mind tries to keep life from moving, it also tries to keep other people from changing. This creates deep suffering because other people are not possessions. They have their own karma, fears, wounds, lessons, desires, and paths. They may grow in ways you do not expect. They may choose differently. They may become distant. They may awaken. They may disappoint. They may become clearer. They may no longer fit the place your mind assigned to them. The attached mind says, "Stay who you were for me." But love cannot breathe under that demand. Even family, friendship, and romance become painful when they are treated as fixed arrangements rather than living connections. People are not furniture in the house of your identity. They are living beings in motion. To love wisely is to understand that closeness must be renewed through presence, not controlled through fear. This does not mean accepting every change without discernment. If someone becomes harmful, dishonest, or careless with your heart, wisdom may ask you to step back. But stepping back is different from trying to freeze them. One protects peace, the other fights reality. You can acknowledge that someone has changed without making it your mission to force them backward. You can grieve the difference without losing yourself in the demand that they become who they used to be. The mind also suffers when it tries to keep pleasure from moving. A joyful season arrives, and immediately the mind starts fearing its end. It says, "How long will this last?" A beautiful moment appears, and the mind tries to hold it so tightly that it stops enjoying it. A good relationship begins, and the mind begins worrying about losing it. A peaceful day comes, and the mind searches for what might ruin it. In trying to preserve happiness, the mind loses contact with happiness. Buddhist wisdom does not teach that you should reject joy because it will pass. It teaches that you should enjoy joy without clinging to it. Let the tea be warm while it is warm. Let the laughter be full while it is here. Let the sunrise touch your eyes without demanding that it stay in the sky. Let love be received today without turning it into a guarantee against tomorrow. When joy is not forced to become permanent, it becomes cleaner, it becomes lighter, it becomes a gift instead of a possession. The same is true for sorrow. When sorrow comes, the mind often fears it will last forever. But sorrow also moves. It may move slowly, but it moves. It changes with attention, with rest, with truth, with time, with compassion, with understanding. If you do not add the story, "This will never end," sorrow becomes more spacious. It may still hurt, but it does not become a life sentence. The mind suffers when it freezes sorrow into forever. This freezing happens through language. Listen to the words the mind uses when it resists movement. Always, never, forever, nothing will change. This is ruined. I cannot recover. I will always feel this way. These words make passing conditions seem permanent. They turn waves into walls. The practice is to soften the language. Instead of, "This will never end," say, "This is here now." Instead of, "I am broken," say, "Pain is present." Instead of, "Life is over," say, "This chapter is painful." The words may seem small, but they change the space around the feeling. The mind suffers because it wants final control over a world made of conditions. In Buddhism, everything arises because of causes and conditions. A flower blooms because of soil, sunlight, water, air, and time. A mood arises because of sleep, memory, thought, health, environment, and many hidden causes. A relationship shifts because of communication, fear, growth, distance, past wounds, expectations, and changing needs. Nothing exists alone. Everything is connected to conditions. When the mind understands conditions, it stops taking every change as a personal attack. If someone's mood changes, it may not be about you. If a plan shifts, it may be due to causes beyond your control. If your own energy changes, it may be the body asking for care. If desire fades, it may be wisdom growing. If fear rises, it may be old conditioning meeting a new situation. Seeing conditions creates patience. It helps the mind stop turning every movement into a drama of self. This does not remove responsibility. Conditions include choices too. Your words are conditions. Your habits are conditions. Your attention is a condition. Your reactions are conditions. This means you are not powerless, but your power is not the power to freeze life. Your power is the power to meet changing conditions wisely. You can plant better causes. You can speak more truthfully. You can stop feeding certain patterns. You can create environments that support peace. You can choose responses that do not renew suffering. The mind wants the power to stop change, but wisdom offers a better power, the power to move skillfully with change. A sailor cannot stop the sea, but can learn how to adjust the sail. A gardener cannot command the season, but can learn when to plant, when to water, when to prune, and when to let the soil rest. In the same way, you cannot stop life from moving, but you can learn how to meet movement with awareness rather than panic. This is what practice does. It does not make life obey you. It makes you less enslaved by your reactions to life. Someone speaks harshly, and instead of instantly becoming anger, you notice heat rising. A plan changes, and instead of collapsing into fear, you feel the disappointment and ask what is needed now. A memory appears, and instead of following it into hours of pain, you recognize it as memory and return to the breath. A chapter ends, and instead of declaring your life empty, you allow grief and slowly listen for what remains. This is not easy. The mind has practiced resistance for a long time. It has learned to tighten when things shift. It has learned to argue with endings. It has learned to treat uncertainty as danger. It has learned to measure safety by how much control it can hold. So when you begin practicing acceptance, the mind may think you are giving up. It may say, "If I accept this, I am approving it." But acceptance is not approval. Acceptance is the refusal to waste your life fighting the fact that something is already here. Acceptance says, "This has happened. Now what is wise?" Resistance says, "This should not have happened," and keeps you trapped before the next step. Acceptance brings you back to action. Resistance keeps you circling in protest. Acceptance does not make you passive. It makes you present enough to respond. When the mind tries to keep life from moving, it often gets trapped in comparison. It compares now to before. It says, "I was happier then. They loved me better then. I was stronger then. Life was clearer then. My body was better then. My opportunities were better then." Some of this may contain truth, but comparison can become suffering when it turns the past into a golden prison. The past may have had beauty, but it also had uncertainty, pain, and impermanence. The mind edits memory and then uses the edited version to reject the present. The present may not look like the past, but it is still alive. It may contain smaller joys, quieter lessons, different doors, deeper wisdom. If you keep demanding that now become then, you will miss what now is trying to offer. Buddhist wisdom asks you to meet the present as it is, not as a failed copy of what came before. The present does not need to become the past to be meaningful. It has its own teaching. Aging is one of the places where this truth becomes very clear. The body changes, and the mind may suffer because it wants yesterday's body back. It wants the strength, face, energy, speed, or ease it once had. There may be grief in this, and that grief deserves kindness, but suffering deepens when aging is treated as an insult rather than a natural unfolding. The body was never promised to remain the same. It has carried you through seasons. It has changed while serving you. To hate it for changing is to misunderstand the loyalty it has shown. Buddhist wisdom can help us meet aging with more tenderness. The changing body reminds us not to postpone living. It teaches humility, it softens pride, it reveals what cannot be held through appearance alone. It invites gratitude for breath, movement, rest, touch, sight, and simple presence. If the mind stops demanding that the body move backward in time, it can begin caring for the body that is here now. This same tenderness applies to the mind itself. Your inner world will change too. Some days you will feel clear. Some days you will feel cloudy. Some days meditation will feel peaceful. Some days it will feel restless. Some days compassion will come easily. Some days old irritation will rise. The mind suffers when it expects spiritual practice to make every day smooth. But practice is not a straight line. It is a returning. The path moves through weather. Trying to keep life from moving can also appear as trying to keep yourself from feeling. The mind says, "I do not want this sadness. I do not want this fear. I do not want this anger. I do not want this longing." So it pushes feelings down, distracts itself, becomes busy, becomes numb, or becomes controlling. But emotions are also movements. When they are allowed to arise and pass with awareness, they can teach and release. When they are blocked, they often return in stronger, more hidden ways. A feeling is like a messenger. If you lock the door, the messenger may keep knocking. If you listen with awareness, you may discover what is needed. Sadness may ask for mourning. Anger may ask for a boundary. Fear may ask for reassurance and grounding. Loneliness may ask for honest connection. Tiredness may ask for rest. The mind suffers when it refuses the message and then blames the knocking. This does not mean acting on every feeling. Feelings are not always instructions, but they are information. Mindfulness lets you feel without being ruled. You can say, "Anger is here," without speaking cruelly. You can say, "Fear is here," without running away. You can say, "Longing is here," without returning to what harms you. You can say, "Sadness is here," without building a permanent identity around it. This is how inner movement becomes wisdom instead of chaos. Life moves at many levels. Outer circumstances move, inner feelings move, relationships move, bodies move, roles move, dreams move, beliefs move. The mind suffers when it chooses one layer and says, "Stop." But nothing stops completely. Even denial changes, even numbness changes, even avoidance changes. The question is not whether life will move. The question is whether awareness will move with it, or resistance will create more pain. There is a humble freedom in admitting, I cannot keep life still. At first, the ego may hear this as weakness, but the heart may feel relief. You no longer have to hold every person, plan, feeling, and outcome in place. You no longer have to guard the past from passing. You no longer have to force the present to match an old picture. You no longer have to treat every change as proof that you failed. Life was always moving. You were never failing because you could not stop it. From this understanding, a gentler strength appears. You can become less rigid. You can listen sooner. You can adjust without shame. You can release without making yourself wrong for having cared. You can begin again without needing the old chapter to disappear from memory. You can let a dream change shape without declaring the dream dead. You can let a relationship find its truth without forcing it into your fantasy. You can let yourself grow without apologizing for no longer fitting an old role. This is what it means to cooperate with life without becoming careless. You still choose. You still care. You still commit. You still protect what is precious. But you do not grip so tightly that what is precious cannot breathe. You do not demand permanence from what is living. You do not confuse control with devotion. You do not make suffering proof of love. You do not turn resistance into identity. When the mind stops trying to keep life from moving, it begins to discover the beauty of participation. You are not here to freeze the dance. You are here to dance with awareness. A song changes tempo. A partner changes step. The floor shifts. Your body tires. Your heart learns. The dance is not ruined because it changes. It is alive because it changes. And yes, some movements hurt. Some songs end too soon. Some partners leave the floor. Some seasons ask you to dance alone for a while. But even then, life has not stopped inviting you. The breath still comes. The morning still opens. The path still waits under your feet. The heart, even when tired, still has the capacity to soften. The mind suffers when it believes that peace is found in stopping the movement. Buddhist wisdom shows another way. Peace is found in seeing movement clearly, feeling it honestly, responding wisely, and letting what passes pass without turning the heart into a battlefield. Peace is not the absence of change. Peace is the end of the war against change. So when life begins to move in a way you did not choose, pause before tightening. Ask, what am I trying to freeze? Ask, what am I afraid will disappear if I let this moment become what it is? Ask, am I protecting peace or am I protecting a picture? Ask, what response belongs to this moment, not to my fear of losing the past? These questions return power to awareness. The answer may not come immediately. That is okay. You do not need instant wisdom. You need honest presence. Sit with the breath. Let the body settle. Notice the mind's demand that life stop. Notice the sorrow beneath it. Notice the love beneath the sorrow. Notice the fear beneath the grip. When you see deeply enough, resistance becomes more understandable, and what is understood can begin to soften. You may find that what you were trying to stop was not life itself, but the pain of feeling powerless. You may find that your grip was a prayer for safety. You may find that your anger at change was really grief for what mattered. You may find that your refusal to move was loyalty to a version of yourself that did not know how to say goodbye. Seeing this can make the heart tender, and tenderness can open what force never could. This is the compassion in Buddhist wisdom. It does not mock the mind for resisting. It understands why the mind resists. The mind wants safety. It wants love to stay. It wants pain to end. It wants meaning to last. It wants the heart protected. But because it does not understand impermanence, it tries to protect life by stopping life. And that is where suffering grows. Awakening begins when protection becomes wiser. Instead of protecting yourself by freezing life, you protect yourself by cultivating awareness. Instead of protecting love by controlling it, you protect love by meeting it with presence and truth. Instead of protecting peace by avoiding change, you protect peace by learning how to breathe through change. Instead of protecting identity by defending old stories, you protect your freedom by allowing the self to keep unfolding. The river will move, the seasons will turn, the body will change. The people around you will grow, leave, return, disappoint, awaken, or become unknown. Your own heart will change its language. Your dreams may change their form. Your understanding will deepen through experiences you did not plan. This is not evidence that life is unstable in a cruel way. It is evidence that life is alive. And because life is alive, you are not finished. This is the quiet hope inside impermanence. If life could be stopped, suffering would also be fixed. If nothing moved, no healing could happen, no forgiveness could ripen, no wisdom could grow, no wound could soften, no new beginning could arrive. The very movement the mind fears is the same movement that allows transformation. The same change that takes away old forms also makes space for new understanding. The same passing that brings grief also makes release possible. So the mind suffers when it tries to keep life from moving because it fights the condition that makes freedom possible. It resists the very flow that could carry pain onward. It blocks the movement that could turn grief into wisdom, endings into openings, fear into humility, and attachment into release. It tries to hold everything in place and then wonders why the heart feels crowded. Let life move. Not recklessly, not without care, not by abandoning wisdom. Let life move because it is already moving. Let feelings move through the body without becoming your master. Let people reveal who they are without forcing them into old shapes. Let memories pass through awareness without rebuilding your home inside them. Let the present be different from the past. Let yourself become different from who fear expected you to remain. This is not losing control. This is finding a deeper kind of control, the control of your attention, your response, your breath, your intention, and your willingness to see clearly. You cannot stop the river, but you can stop drowning by learning how to stop fighting the current. You cannot stop the seasons, but you can stop wearing winter clothes in summer because your mind misses the cold. You cannot stop life from moving, but you can stop making movement the enemy. And as this truth settles, the next doorway begins to open. Because when the mind refuses to move with life, suffering becomes repeated. Old reactions return, old wounds find new faces, old fears create familiar choices. And without awareness, the same pain begins to look like destiny. This is where the next teaching begins. How old suffering becomes familiar karma when awareness is absent. And once the mind keeps fighting the movement of life, something deeper begins to happen. The same pain starts returning in different clothes. The same fear finds new situations. The same wound chooses new people. The same reaction repeats itself so often that the person stops seeing it as a pattern and starts calling it life. There is a quiet kind of suffering that does not arrive as a surprise anymore. It feels familiar, almost expected, like an old visitor who knows where to sit in your heart. You do not welcome it, but you recognize it. You may even say, "This always happens to me," without noticing that this sentence is not only describing pain. It may also be revealing a pattern that awareness has not yet entered. Buddhist wisdom teaches that karma is not simply punishment, luck, or some invisible force waiting to reward or destroy you. In its deepest sense, karma points to action, intention, habit, and consequence. What you repeat begins to shape the path beneath your feet. What you keep feeding becomes easier to return to. What you do without awareness becomes the road your mind walks automatically. And when old suffering is not seen clearly, it becomes familiar karma. This means the pain may have started as something that happened to you, but the pattern continues through the way the mind responds, protects, expects, chooses, avoids, and reacts. The original wound may not have been your fault, but without awareness, the wound can begin making decisions through you. It can choose your silence. It can choose your anger. It can choose your mistrust. It can choose who you chase, who you reject, what you tolerate, and what you fear. Then, slowly, the past begins to repeat itself, not because life is cursed, but because the mind is moving from old conditioning. This is why awareness is so important. Without awareness, the mind lives from habit and calls it personality. It says, "This is just how I am." But Buddhist wisdom asks, is it truly who you are, or is it what suffering taught you to repeat? A person may say, "I do not trust anyone," but perhaps that is old betrayal still speaking. A person may say, "I always ruin good things," but perhaps that is shame guiding their behavior before love has a chance to deepen. A person may say, "People always leave," but perhaps fear of abandonment makes them cling, test, withdraw, or accuse until closeness becomes heavy. Old suffering becomes familiar karma when it stops being examined and starts being obeyed. A painful pattern can feel like destiny because it has happened many times. But repetition is not always destiny. Sometimes repetition is a lesson that has not been brought into clear seeing. The same situation returns because the same inner movement keeps meeting life in the same way. The names change, the places change, the conversations change, but the hidden wound underneath remains untouched. Until awareness enters, the mind keeps walking in circles and calling the circle fate. This is painful because familiar suffering can create a strange comfort. Not a happy comfort, but a known one. The mind knows how to suffer in old ways. It knows how to expect rejection. It knows how to hide feelings. It knows how to overthink silence. It knows how to prepare for disappointment. It knows how to become angry before it becomes honest. It knows how to leave before it is left. These reactions may be painful, but they are practiced. The mind returns to them because they feel like survival. This is how old suffering becomes a habit of being. You do not only remember pain, you organize yourself around avoiding it, proving it, or repeating it. Someone once made you feel unseen, so now you enter rooms already expecting not to matter. Someone once controlled you, so now every suggestion feels like a threat. Someone once betrayed you, so now every delay becomes evidence. Someone once shamed you, so now every mistake feels like exposure. The present becomes covered by the fingerprints of the past. Buddhist wisdom does not blame you for this. It sees the causes. It understands that the mind learns from pain. If fire burns the hand, the body remembers. If love hurts the heart, the mind also remembers. This memory has a protective purpose. But protection becomes suffering when it no longer sees clearly. If every warm flame is treated as the old fire, you cannot receive warmth. If every kind person is treated as the one who harmed you, you cannot receive love. If every change is treated as the old loss returning, you cannot receive growth. Awareness is the light that shows the difference between what is happening now and what the mind is expecting from before. Without that light, the past borrows the face of the present. You think you are responding to today, but you are really reacting to yesterday. You think you are protecting yourself from this person, this chance, this change, but often you are protecting an old wound from being touched. This is why mindfulness is not just a peaceful practice. It is a way of breaking karma at the root. When a feeling rises, mindfulness asks, "What is this?" When a reaction appears, it asks, where did this come from? When the same pain returns, it asks, what am I repeating? These questions create space. And in that space, the automatic chain weakens. The chain often begins with contact. Something happens. A message is not answered. A tone sounds different. A plan changes. Someone disagrees with you. A door closes. A memory rises. Then feeling appears. Maybe fear, maybe shame, maybe anger, maybe sadness. Then the old story arrives quickly. I knew this would happen. They do not care. I am not safe. I am being rejected. Nothing ever works for me. Then the reaction follows. You withdraw, you attack, you plead, you over-explain, you numb yourself, you chase, you close your heart. This chain can happen so fast that it feels like one movement, but awareness slows it down. It helps you see each link. It shows you that a delayed reply is one thing, but the story, I am unwanted, is another. It shows you that disagreement is one thing, but the story, I am under attack, is another. It shows you that uncertainty is one thing, but the story, I cannot survive this, is another. When you see the links, you no longer have to follow the whole chain. This is where freedom begins in ordinary moments. Not in a dramatic escape from life, but in the small pause before the old karma completes itself. You feel the urge to repeat the old reaction, but you breathe. You feel the familiar pull toward old suffering, but you look closely. You feel the body preparing for a battle that may not be here, and you soften. You feel the mind trying to turn one moment into the whole story of your life, and you say, not yet, let me see clearly. That pause is powerful because karma continues through unconscious repetition. When repetition becomes conscious, something new becomes possible. Old suffering becomes familiar karma through unexamined intention. In Buddhism, intention matters because it is the seed behind action. Two people can do the same thing outwardly, but the inner seed may be different. Silence can come from wisdom, or it can come from punishment. Leaving can come from self-respect, or it can come from fear. Helping can come from compassion, or it can come from needing approval. Holding on can come from love, or it can come from attachment. Without awareness, we may not know the true seed behind our actions. This matters because the seed shapes the fruit. If you speak from fear, even kind words may carry pressure. If you help from insecurity, generosity may become resentment. If you stay from attachment, patience may become suffering. If you leave from avoidance, freedom may become loneliness. Awareness asks you to look beneath the action and see the intention. Not to judge yourself, but to understand what you are planting. Many people keep harvesting the same pain because they keep planting from the same wound. They choose relationships from loneliness and later wonder why they feel unseen. They say yes from fear and later wonder why they feel trapped. They stay silent to avoid conflict and later wonder why resentment grows. They chase approval and later wonder why they feel empty. They control others and later wonder why love feels tense. The fruit is not random. It grows from seeds repeated over time. But this is also hopeful. If suffering is shaped by causes, then peace can also be shaped by causes. You can plant different seeds. You can pause before speaking. You can choose honesty where you once chose pleasing. You can choose a boundary where you once chose resentment. You can choose patience where you once chose panic. You can choose to feel loneliness without running into the wrong arms. You can choose to let fear be present without letting it drive. This is how karma changes, not by wishing for a different life while repeating the same inner movement, but by bringing awareness to the movement itself. Old suffering becomes familiar when the mind finds identity in it. We touched this before, but here it takes another form. The identity does not only say, "This is who I am." It begins to create a future that matches itself. If you believe you are always abandoned, you may unconsciously choose unavailable people because they feel familiar. If you believe you are not worthy of peace, you may feel uncomfortable around calmness and create conflict just to return to known emotional weather. If you believe love must be earned through suffering, you may reject simple love because it feels too easy. This is not because you want pain. It is because the nervous system often prefers what it recognizes over what would heal it. Familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar peace. The body may not know what to do with kindness that does not demand performance. The mind may not know how to rest in a relationship that does not require begging. The heart may not trust a quiet life because chaos has trained it to equate intensity with meaning. So old karma repeats as attraction, avoidance, reaction, and expectation. You feel drawn to what confirms the old wound. You feel bored by what might heal it. You feel suspicious of what is gentle. You feel alive around what is unstable. Then, when pain returns, the mind says, "See, this is life." But awareness asks, what felt familiar here before it became painful? This question can awaken you. What did you recognize in that person before you trusted them? What did you ignore because it matched an old pattern? What did you call chemistry that was actually anxiety? What did you call loyalty that was actually fear of starting over? What did you call patience that was actually self-abandonment? These questions are not meant to shame the heart. They are meant to bring light to the places where suffering keeps disguising itself as destiny. The absence of awareness makes old suffering feel normal. This is one of the saddest things about human pain. People can become so used to tension that calm feels wrong. They can become so used to being ignored that respect feels strange. They can become so used to carrying everyone that rest feels selfish. They can become so used to criticism that kindness feels suspicious. They can become so used to emotional hunger that crumbs feel like a feast. When suffering becomes normal, the person may stop seeking freedom because they no longer recognize bondage. They may defend the very conditions that drain them. They may say, "At least I know how to handle this." But handling suffering is not the same as being free from it. Surviving a pattern is not the same as awakening from it. Buddhist wisdom gently asks us to stop confusing endurance with liberation. Awareness begins by noticing what you have normalized. Notice where your body tightens but your mind says, "It is fine." Notice where you feel drained but call it duty. Notice where you feel small but call it love. Notice where you keep forgiving without seeing change. Notice where you keep accepting confusion because clarity would require a decision. Notice where you keep repeating pain because peace would require unfamiliar courage. This noticing can hurt because it removes the comfort of denial. But it also restores power. You cannot change what you refuse to see. Once you see, the pattern may not disappear immediately, but it can no longer remain completely hidden. Every moment of seeing weakens the spell. Old suffering also becomes familiar karma through emotional momentum. A reaction repeated many times becomes easy. Anger practiced for years rises quickly. Worry practiced for years appears before thought is complete. Self-blame practiced for years becomes the first explanation. Avoidance practiced for years feels natural. This is why awakening requires patience. You are not only changing ideas, you are changing grooves in the mind. Buddhist practice understands repetition. The path itself is built on repeated awareness, repeated compassion, repeated returning. You do not become free by seeing once. You become freer by seeing again and again. Each time the old pattern rises, you have a chance to weaken it. Each time you do not feed it fully, something changes. Each time you return to the breath, the mind learns another way home. This is why small moments matter. The old karma says, react. You pause. The old karma says, assume the worst. You ask for clarity. The old karma says, hide your truth. You speak gently. The old karma says, go back to what hurts. You stay with the loneliness and let it pass. The old karma says, punish yourself. You place compassion where shame expected cruelty. These moments may seem small, but they interrupt years of unconscious movement. The mind often wants a dramatic breakthrough, but karma is often changed through quiet repetition. The person who once lived from fear learns safety in small breaths. The person who once lived from anger learns patience in small pauses. The person who once lived from shame learns dignity in small acts of self-respect. The person who once lived from attachment learns freedom in small moments of non-grasping. This is not fast, but it is real. Old suffering becomes familiar karma when the mind keeps returning to the same interpretation. Events may change, but the interpretation remains. Someone cancels a plan, and the interpretation is rejection. Someone succeeds, and the interpretation is personal failure. Someone gives feedback, and the interpretation is attack. Life becomes difficult, and the interpretation is punishment. The same interpretation creates the same emotional world again and again. Awareness asks you to question interpretation. It does not mean you become naive. It means you stop treating the first story as final truth. Is this rejection, or could there be another reason? Is this failure, or is it a lesson? Is this attack, or is it discomfort with being corrected? Is this punishment, or is it a difficult condition arising from many causes? When interpretation loosens, suffering has less material to repeat itself. The Buddha often pointed toward direct experience. Before the story, what is here? A sensation, a thought, a sound, a memory, a feeling, a situation. When you stay close to direct experience, the mind creates less unnecessary suffering. But when it adds old interpretation, the present becomes heavy with the past. This is why mindfulness returns again and again to the body, breath, and immediate reality. It helps you separate what is happening from what the old wound says it means. Old suffering also repeats through avoidance. What is avoided does not disappear. It waits in hidden form. Avoided grief may become bitterness. Avoided fear may become control. Avoided shame may become perfectionism. Avoided loneliness may become attachment to unavailable people. Avoided anger may become quiet resentment. Avoided truth may become anxiety. When awareness is absent, avoidance can look like peace because there is no open conflict. But inside, the unexamined pain keeps shaping life. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to drown yourself in pain. It asks you to meet what is present with enough courage and compassion that it no longer needs to rule from the shadows. To feel grief consciously is different from being controlled by grief unconsciously. To feel fear consciously is different from letting fear choose your path. To acknowledge anger consciously is different from letting anger harden your heart. What is brought into awareness becomes workable. What remains hidden becomes karma. This is why meditation can feel uncomfortable at first. When the outer noise becomes quiet, inner patterns become visible. The mind may not like this. It may say meditation is not working because old pain appears. But sometimes that is the practice working. You are finally seeing what has been driving you. You are seeing the restless craving, the old fear, the grief beneath anger, the shame beneath control, the loneliness beneath attachment. Seeing is not failure. Seeing is the beginning of freedom. The problem is that many people stop when they first see discomfort. They think peace means never meeting pain. But peace grows when you can meet pain without being swallowed by it. The old suffering becomes karma when it remains unseen. When seen clearly, it becomes a teacher. The same pain that once repeated unconsciously can become the doorway to understanding your mind. There is a difference between pain repeating and pain teaching. Pain repeats when you react the same way, believe the same story, and return to the same pattern without awareness. Pain teaches when you ask, "What is this showing me? What belief is being touched? What attachment is being revealed? What boundary is needed? What compassion is missing? What habit am I being invited to stop feeding?" The same difficult moment can either deepen bondage or deepen wisdom, depending on awareness. This is where Buddhist wisdom becomes practical in daily life. When old suffering rises, do not immediately ask, "How do I make this disappear?" First ask, "How does this move? Does it begin in the body? Does it become a thought? Does it search for evidence? Does it push you toward a familiar action? Does it make you want to speak, hide, chase, blame, numb, or control?" Study the pattern like a monk studying the breath. Not with hatred, but with curiosity. The more you understand the pattern, the less mysterious it becomes. What once felt like fate begins to look like a chain of causes, and what has causes can be interrupted. For example, if loneliness leads you to reach for someone who confuses you, awareness can enter before the message is sent. You can feel the loneliness directly. You can breathe with it. You can ask what kind of connection would truly nourish you. You can choose not to turn temporary emptiness into another cycle of pain. The loneliness may still hurt, but now it is not driving blindly. A new karma is being planted. If criticism leads you to attack or collapse, awareness can enter before the reaction. You can feel the heat, the shame, the tightening. You can ask whether the words contain useful truth or only someone else's projection. You can respond instead of becoming the old wound. A new karma is being planted. If uncertainty leads you to control, awareness can enter before control becomes behavior. You can admit fear. You can ask for clarity without demanding ownership. You can ground yourself in the present. You can let another person be human without turning their every movement into your emergency. A new karma is being planted. This is how liberation becomes real. Not by escaping human emotion, but by stopping emotion from becoming unconscious action. Not by controlling life, but by becoming intimate with the mind that reacts to life. Not by denying the past, but by refusing to let the past keep using your body, voice, attention, and choices as its servants. Old suffering becomes familiar karma when awareness is absent because the mind keeps creating conditions for the same suffering to continue. If you keep feeding resentment, the world becomes full of enemies. If you keep feeding shame, every mistake becomes proof of unworthiness. If you keep feeding fear, every unknown becomes danger. If you keep feeding attachment, every change becomes threat. If you keep feeding avoidance, every truth becomes heavier. But if you feed awareness, something else begins. The world may not instantly change, but your relationship to it changes. You begin to notice before reacting. You begin to question before believing. You begin to feel before acting. You begin to choose before repeating. This is the end of helplessness. You are no longer only the result of old pain. You become a participant in your own awakening. This does not mean every pattern ends quickly. Some old karma is deep because it has been practiced for many years, sometimes across generations. Families can pass down fear, silence, anger, control, shame, scarcity, and emotional distance. A child grows inside those patterns and later thinks they are personal flaws, but they may be inherited habits of suffering. Awareness allows you to see, this did not begin with me, but it can begin to change through me. This is a powerful moment. When you see an inherited pattern clearly, you are not only freeing yourself, you are refusing to carry suffering forward blindly. You may still feel the old pull, but you do not have to give it your full obedience. You can become the place where a pattern slows down. You can become the person who learns to speak gently after generations of harshness, the person who rests after generations of survival, the person who feels instead of numbing, the person who sets boundaries instead of disappearing, the person who turns pain into wisdom instead of passing it on as more pain. This is not easy work. It requires patience, humility, and repeated returning. There will be moments when you repeat the old pattern again. Do not turn that into another identity. Do not say, "I failed, I am hopeless." That is old suffering trying to renew itself through shame. Instead, return to awareness. Say, "The pattern appeared. I see it more clearly now." This is practice. Even seeing after the reaction is better than not seeing at all. Next time you may see during the reaction. Later you may see before it begins. Slowly the chain weakens. The path does not demand perfection, it asks for sincerity. Buddhist wisdom teaches that ignorance keeps the wheel turning. Ignorance does not mean stupidity. It means not seeing the causes of suffering clearly. When awareness is absent, craving, clinging, fear, reaction, and consequence keep moving in circles. This is samsara in the inner life. The same emotional worlds return. The same lessons appear. The same dissatisfaction follows different achievements, relationships, escapes, and distractions. The scenery changes, but the wheel continues. Awareness does not stop the wheel by force. It stops feeding it. It sees craving as craving. It sees fear as fear. It sees anger as anger. It sees old pain as old pain. It sees the urge to repeat, and in seeing it, something no longer happens automatically. The wheel loses momentum when unconsciousness is replaced by knowing. This knowing is not cold analysis. It is warm, embodied, honest presence. You know the feeling in your body. You know the story in your mind. You know the urge in your behavior. You know the hurt beneath the reaction. You know the old seed trying to create the old fruit. And because you know, you can choose differently. At first, choosing differently may feel unnatural. Peace may feel unfamiliar. A healthy boundary may feel cruel. Honest speech may feel dangerous. Rest may feel lazy. Receiving care may feel uncomfortable. Letting go may feel like loss. This does not mean the new path is wrong. It may simply mean the old karma is losing its authority and the mind has not yet learned the new road. Stay with the new road gently. Each wise choice becomes a condition. Each condition supports the next. Over time, what once felt foreign becomes more natural. The nervous system learns that peace is not danger. The heart learns that love does not require self-abandonment. The mind learns that uncertainty does not require panic. The body learns that truth can be spoken without disaster. A different karma begins to form. And this is the hopeful side of the teaching. Karma is not a cage if awareness enters. It is a field. Seeds have been planted, yes. Some by you, some before you, some by pain, some by fear, some by people who did not know better. But new seeds can still be planted. Awareness is a seed. Compassion is a seed. Patience is a seed. Honest speech is a seed. Right action is a seed. Letting go is a seed. Every time you choose them, you are no longer only repeating the past. You are participating in freedom. Old suffering becomes familiar karma when awareness is absent, but old suffering becomes wisdom when awareness is present. This is the turning point. The same wound that once made you reactive can teach compassion. The same loss that once made you cling can teach impermanence. The same betrayal that once made you bitter can teach discernment. The same fear that once made you hide can teach courage. The same loneliness that once made you chase can teach you how to return to yourself. Nothing is wasted when awareness touches it. Even pain can become part of the path. But pain does not become wisdom automatically. It becomes wisdom when it is seen, understood, softened, and no longer used as permission to repeat unconscious harm. Without awareness, suffering hardens. With awareness, suffering opens. So when a familiar pain returns, do not rush to call it fate. Do not immediately say, "Here we go again. This is my life." Pause, breathe, look closely. Ask, what old seed is being watered right now? Ask, what story is trying to repeat? Ask, what action would continue the old suffering? Ask, what response would plant something new? These questions are simple, but they interrupt the wheel. You may not always choose perfectly. That is okay. The path is not about never falling into old karma. It is about waking up sooner each time. It is about becoming less loyal to suffering and more loyal to truth. It is about understanding that familiar pain is not necessarily home. Sometimes it is only a road you have walked too often. And once you see that, you do not have to keep walking it blindly. The mind may still try to return to what it knows. The body may still tighten around old fears. The heart may still mistake intensity for meaning and familiarity for safety. But now awareness is present. A small lamp has been lit, and even a small lamp changes a dark room. You may still see the old furniture, the old walls, the old door, but now you also see the way out. This is how the teaching becomes alive. You are not cursed by your patterns. You are not doomed by your past. You are not trapped forever inside the reactions suffering taught you. Every moment of awareness is a small freedom. Every pause is a doorway. Every honest seeing is a break in the chain. Every compassionate breath says, the past may have shaped this moment, but it does not have to own the next one. Old suffering becomes familiar karma when awareness is absent because the mind keeps repeating what it has not understood. But when awareness enters, repetition becomes revelation. The pattern that once imprisoned you becomes visible. The visible becomes workable. The workable becomes transformable. And what can be transformed no longer has absolute power over your life. So let the familiar pain become a bell, not a prison. Let it ring and wake you up. Let it say, look here, this is where the old chain begins. Let it guide your attention to the exact place where freedom is needed. Do not hate the bell. Do not worship it either. Listen, learn, and choose with clearer eyes. Because the path is not about becoming someone who never feels old pain. It is about becoming someone who no longer lets old pain write every new chapter. It is about meeting the returning pattern with enough awareness that the ending can finally change. It is about turning karma from unconscious repetition into conscious awakening. And when this becomes clear, another truth begins to rise from beneath it. If old suffering repeats when awareness is absent, then liberation begins when awareness reveals what we have been calling by the wrong name. The heart may discover that what it called love was sometimes attachment, what it called loyalty was sometimes fear, and what it called devotion was sometimes a refusal to let go. This opens the next teaching, why liberation begins when you stop calling attachment love. And now, as this journey comes to a close, let this truth settle gently in your heart. The mind does not fear change because change is always dangerous. The mind fears change because change asks it to stop hiding inside what is familiar. It asks the heart to loosen its grip on the old pain, the old story, the old identity, the old attachment, and the old illusion of control. It asks you to step into a space where you may not know what comes next, but where your soul can finally breathe again. For so long, the mind may have believed that holding on was protection. It may have believed that if it could keep things the same, it would never have to feel loss, confusion, rejection, loneliness, or uncertainty again, so it clung to people who had already changed. It clung to memories that had already passed. It clung to pain that had become familiar. It clung to certainty, even when certainty became a prison. It clung to attachment and called it love. It clung to ego and called it strength. It clung to old suffering and called it destiny. But Buddhist wisdom opens the eyes slowly. It reminds us that life was never meant to be held still. Everything moves, everything shifts, everything rises and passes away. The body changes, feelings change, relationships change, dreams change. The self you thought you had to protect is already changing. The wound you thought would define you forever is already changing. Even the fear that says, "I cannot let go," is not permanent. It appears, it speaks, it tightens the heart, and with awareness, it can also soften. This is the sacred lesson hidden inside change. Change is not only what takes things away. Change is also what makes healing possible. If nothing changed, pain would last forever. If nothing changed, grief would never soften. If nothing changed, the mind would remain trapped in the first story it believed about itself. If nothing changed, the person who was wounded would never become the person who awakens. So the very thing the mind resists may be the same force that carries it toward freedom. You have seen how attachment makes the mind fear the freedom it has been asking for. The heart says it wants peace, but the hand still holds the chain. It says it wants healing, but it returns to the wound. It says it wants release, but it keeps protecting the cage because the cage has become familiar. And this is where suffering begins to repeat. Not because you are weak, not because you are broken, but because the mind often chooses the known pain over the unknown peace. You have seen how craving for certainty becomes a quiet prison. The mind says, "I will move when I am sure. I will trust when I know. I will let go when the future is safe." But life does not offer that kind of guarantee. The future never arrives fully explained. The next step is rarely shown all at once. So the person who waits for perfect certainty may spend years standing before an open door, asking for proof that the road will not hurt. Buddhist wisdom teaches that peace does not come from knowing everything. Peace comes from learning to breathe inside what cannot be controlled. You have seen how clinging can turn even pain into identity. A wound enters the heart, and over time the mind begins to say, "This is who I am." It becomes the rejected one, the abandoned one, the betrayed one, the tired one, the one who cannot trust, the one who always suffers. But pain is not the whole of you. Pain may be part of your path, but it is not your final name. You can honor what happened without becoming it forever. You can remember the wound without letting it rule every new moment. You can carry wisdom without carrying the weight. You have seen how impermanence reveals that the self you are protecting is already changing. The person you were years ago is not exactly the person listening now. The thoughts have changed. The body has changed. The heart has changed. The meaning of old pain has changed. Even your fear has changed shape many times. So why keep defending a fixed version of yourself that life has already begun to move beyond? The self is not a stone. It is more like a river, always flowing, always reshaping, always touched by new conditions. You have seen why the mind suffers when it tries to keep life from moving. The mind stands in front of the river and says, "Stop." It stands before the season and says, "Do not change." It stands before an ending and says, "Do not leave." But life continues. The suffering deepens not only because something has changed, but because the mind keeps fighting what has already begun to move. Acceptance does not mean you approve of every loss. It means you stop wasting your life arguing with what is already here, so you can finally respond with wisdom. You have seen how old suffering becomes familiar karma when awareness is absent. The same pain returns in different forms. The same fear chooses new situations. The same wound finds new voices. The same reaction repeats until it begins to feel like fate, but repetition is not always destiny. Sometimes it is only a pattern waiting to be seen. The moment awareness enters, the wheel begins to slow. The moment you pause before repeating the old reaction, a new path begins to open. You have seen why liberation begins when you stop calling attachment love. This may be one of the hardest truths for the heart to accept, because sometimes what we called love was really fear. Sometimes what we called loyalty was really clinging. Sometimes what we called patience was really self-abandonment. Sometimes what we called devotion was really the terror of being alone. But love does not need to destroy your peace to prove it is real. Love does not ask you to disappear. Love does not turn your suffering into its favorite evidence. True love gives space, clarity, kindness, and dignity. Attachment grips. Love breathes. You have seen how the ego creates fear when change threatens its illusion of control. The ego wants life to obey its plan. It wants people to remain predictable. It wants the future to be safe before it arrives. It wants the self to stay protected behind old images. But life does not belong to the ego. Life moves according to causes and conditions far greater than one person's fear. When change comes, the ego panics because its throne begins to shake. But the shaking of the ego is not always destruction. Sometimes it is awakening. Sometimes life is not taking your power away. It is showing you that control was never the same as peace. And through all of this, one message becomes clear. The mind fears change, but the soul is not meant to live in chains. The mind may tremble before the unknown, but your deeper wisdom knows that freedom often begins where certainty ends. The mind may cling to the familiar, but your deeper wisdom knows that familiar pain is still pain. The mind may call the cage home, but your deeper wisdom knows that surviving inside a cage is not the same as being free. So as you leave this teaching, do not ask yourself only, "What am I afraid to lose?" Ask yourself, "What might I gain if I stopped holding on so tightly?" Ask, "What peace have I been delaying because I keep protecting an old version of myself?" Ask, "What truth has life been trying to show me through the changes I keep resisting?" Ask, "What if this ending is not here to punish me, but to release me from what I could not release on my own?" Let the breath become soft. Let the shoulders drop. Let the heart stop fighting every passing thing. You do not have to force yourself to become fearless tonight. You do not have to let go of everything in one moment. You only have to begin seeing clearly. See the attachment as attachment. See the fear as fear. See the ego as ego. See the old pain as old pain. See the change not as an enemy, but as a teacher standing at the doorway of your freedom. The mind may still whisper, "Stay where it is familiar." But wisdom will whisper back, "Familiar is not always safe." The mind may say, "What if I lose myself?" But wisdom will answer, "You may only lose the version of yourself that was built around fear." The mind may say, "I am not ready." But wisdom will say, "One honest breath is enough to begin." This is not the end of your path. It is the moment you stop mistaking resistance for protection. It is the moment you understand that change does not always come to break you. Sometimes change comes to break the chain. Sometimes change comes to loosen the identity that pain created. Sometimes change comes to remove what your attachment kept defending. Sometimes change comes to lead you back to the quiet place inside you that was never truly imprisoned. So let what is passing pass with grace. Let what is leaving teach you. Let what is changing awaken you. Let what you cannot control return you to humility. Let what you fear become a doorway into deeper awareness. And when the mind begins to tighten again, remember this: the freedom you have been searching for may be hidden inside the very change you keep resisting. If this message touched something real inside you, write in the comments, "I allow life to set me free." Let those words be more than a comment. Let them be a quiet vow to stop worshipping the cage, to stop calling fear wisdom, and to stop holding on to what no longer gives your heart peace. And if you want more Buddhist wisdom to calm your mind, release old suffering, and guide you back to inner freedom, subscribe and stay connected. The next teaching may be the one your heart has been waiting for.